Hello and welcome to the next episode of Fiddler's Green Podcast number 72, State of Affairs. This is the first one I've done in quite a while because over Lent, essentially, I had given up doing politics. I was off X. I was supposedly going to just cover cultural stuff, and indeed I did. I had a series called Lenten Restorations on Culture. I know current events whatsoever. And, it's so funny. Everyone always tells you in the ordinary course of doing these things, oh, we don't want current events. We just want culture. We don't want to talk about blog drama. We don't want to talk about who's having arguments on X. But, come on. We all know. We all know what everyone's tuning in for to this channel. I forged this channel on discourse, and therefore thereafter I should say the death of discourse, and so it shall continue. So thank you again for joining me. This is going to be kind of a potpourri episode, a little smattering of this and that. I don't have a ton of organization, but a lot of stuff to cover, and I think I might be able to draw it together in a broader point of view. I guess just while I'm waiting for people to kind of come in, and I'm going to cover this later on the stream, but just after work and partially during lunch, I saw the worst YouTube video, the worst political YouTube video I think I've ever seen in my entire life. And it facilitated this very bizarre semi-argument between me and my wife. And it was Lauren Southern's attempt to take down Christian nationalism. I don't exactly know. I mean, you're going to hear about this in a few stages, but this just seems to highlight everything that I hate about doing this in 2026. This dialectic that we're participating in. As it stands, I've the two people she was going after in this video. Everyone, of course, knows Lauren Southern. I don't know. This is just one of these premier figures in ancient alt-right explosions of 2016, 2017. She was kind of there from the beginning, not a real old head, but one that hopped on the bandwagon right when it was getting hot. And now, of course, for the last 2 years, for the last 4 years, she's been back with a series of denouncements about all of the horrible right-wing people doing various things in the interwebs. But this time, what was really strange is that usually you expect Lauren Southern to kind of be punching above her weight, kind of. The idea is to go after people like Rogan and Trump, the people who are really in the media spotlight. And this time, the two targets of Lauren's little invective were Joel Webbon, who is I think he's a Baptist pastor. I hope I don't get the Protestant denomination wrong. He's a pastor of some denomination. And I've spoken with him in group chats. We've had a back and forth here and there. It's been more or less friendly. I've respected the man's work. I can't say I've really watched the podcast. Joe Webbon has this style that really irritates me. It's a very uncommon style for Christian content creators, but is pretty much common everywhere else, which is he takes these extreme joke positions, these kind of like the shock value statements, and just tosses them out there to piss off people. I absolutely hate this. I hate it when moderates like PF Young do it. I hate it when conservatives like, Lauren Southern used to do this. I certainly hate it when leftists do this, like Hassan Piker. I hate juicing the algorithm by taking something that is in its plain form, innocuous, common sense, and then juicing it up and throwing it out there for raw meat. But Joel does that, and as other stuff, all the stuff that I've read that's been serious has been great, perfectly solid. And the other person that Lauren Southern went after was none other than Andrew Wilson. And Andrew Wilson is somebody who I've regarded for the longest time as being kind of a necessary evil. Obviously, he's very famous for this kind of frame game way of pursuing debates, which is the optimal way to do debates. I want to bring these things back to prehistory, right? But everyone who's watched this channel, and this channel has been going on for 10 years. We are, March of 2016 was when this channel kicked off in earnest. And, I wasn't doing these podcasts in March because of Lent. So this is effectively a 10-year anniversary. But I started this channel, and I'd done blogging on the side here and there for 5 years previously at a very minor capacity while I was in grad school. But what kicked it off was my dissatisfaction with the debate performance of Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin. And if you look back, he had a few debates against Christy Winters and another one against this other socialist guy who died recently, Michael something or another. I forget, some Jewish name. I forget what it was exactly. But he tragically died. I don't think he had kids, but it was very sad. And Sargon goes on to these debates. And at that time, he's mainly known as like this guy who owns SJWs online. And he just gets his ass handed to him. And it's funny because it's really sort of a technological development in a certain way. Nobody in 2026 would have walked into a debate live stream as unprepared as Carl had been in 2016. But in 2016, that's what people did. They just went on to a live stream, like you'd show up to a pub, and they just laid their opinions on the table, and they weren't prepared for people to hit back, to kind of be aggressive, to try to humiliate them. And so they say about debating the same thing that Mike Tyson said about fights. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And so a lot of people, if they're used to friendly conversations, they're not used to sort of the frame game that goes on inside a debate environment. And this is something that is really remarkable. It started with Destiny and the internet blood sports, but there was this evolution of internet debate until it became this highly optimized frame game. And of course, Andrew Wilson stepped into this on the Christian side, on the Christian and nationalist side. I guess these days that are called Christian nationalists, who knows? But Andrew Wilson basically just plays a frame game. And what's kind of remarkable about it is, unlike these other people who have frame games like Vosh and Destiny, and there's probably a dozen other people who do the same game. It's easy. Anybody could do it. A chatbot could do it at this stage. Andrew Wilson actually represents a worldview that is consistent in the abstract. So the great Achilles heel for people like Destiny and the rest of the Destiny clones was that they basically just came up with their worldview based on vibes and what they thought was popular and the particular things that they had a preference for. And so you'd have like 10 of these debate bros that were all in, roughly a left-wing circle. And they would all have radical contradictions in their own worldviews, and eventually they would contradict themselves because they weren't working from any kind of model of belief. And Andrew Wilson has the advantage of the fact that he is essentially an Orthodox Christian. He has a very classical understanding of politics and virtue. And so he doesn't need to invent a worldview. He has something already cut out there for him, and it's consistent. And unlike most other left-wing worldviews, it's relevant. And so I regarded him as this necessary evil. But I guess since he's gone on Joe Rogan, people have taken notice of this. And, Lauren Southern made it her job to go after Andrew Wilson and Joel Webbon. And it's bizarre. I mean, that video was so bad that it took someone who I ordinarily would have hated, Andrew Wilson, and made me temporarily really like them, which is just the sign of a terrible video. And I have nothing against Andrew Wilson, right? Like, I don't have any argument against him other than the fact that I think that he's more or less doing a kind of debate that I think is, for all practical purposes, useless. But it's very interesting because just the other day, I had one of the Lauren, of course, the reason why the video was so bad was Lauren's big idea was that she was going to critique these people from the perspective of a Christian woman. So she presents herself as a Christian and then tries to indict Joel Webbon and Andrew Wilson, about which we don't know anything wrong they've ever done. To my knowledge, Joel Webbon is squeaky clean. And Andrew Wilson, who has had his personal life discussed at length, the best they can do is that he had a marriage that ended like 15 years ago. This is like thin gruel indeed if it comes to actually generating scandals. So, this is the big indictment is, oh my God, they're hypocrites because they're presenting themselves as Christian. Of course, Lauren Southern presents herself as Christian. She is the arbiter who stands in judgment of all Christian nationalists. And as we all know, Lauren Southern has the most torrid history imaginable when it comes to it. It's embarrassing. I don't even need to really. Maybe I do need to go through it, but I think I'll go through it later, perhaps as the audience, as the flow of the conversation demands it. Her whole idea is that these people aren't engaged in Christianity. They're engaged in the based ritual. The based ritual is this thing, Contra Points. Not Contra Points. Lauren Southern, but we'll get to Contra Points in a minute. Lauren Southern explains the based ritual is this thing that we used to do in the alt-right, where we had to prove how edgy we were by saying mean words really loudly. And this destroys the Christian witness of these people. Like, Joel Webben. I mean, you can tell that she's grasping for straws. She couldn't come up with any other scandal other than Joel Webben performatively says mean words. And Andrew Wilson gets performatively angry at thoughts on the whatever podcast. I mean, what? That's mean words. That's it. That's it. We're going with mean words makes you not Christian, and having a podcast called The Crucible and then saying mean words on this sacred podcast called The Crucible. That's like sacrilege for Christians. I mean, all Crucible is just a little case that heats up and burns metal and melts metal. It's literally a crucible is a melting pot. That's what it is. They're the same thing. They're the same thing. If Andrew Wilson's show had been called The Melting Pot, would you be horrified as a Christian because he said mean words to other people? That's what you're getting, and that's the big indictment. But the big thing is it's the based ritual. That's the key word that Lauren Southern highlighted. And then I can't remember if this is today or yesterday, but I come across another video, and this is on the leftist podcast called Doom Scroll. And once more, guess who else is back from the ancient world of 2016, the same year I started my channel? We all got our channels started at the same time. I'm so much less successful than these other people, Lauren Southerns and Natalie Wynns. I don't think I'd change places with them for all the money in the world, but there you go. And guess what? Like Natalie Wynn of Contra Points is on there, and they're discussing all of the problems of the contemporary world, mostly hanging they're mostly hanging over the radicalization of young men. I mean, first of all, radicalization. I mean, these people, Contra Points, during their careers purported to be a radical leftist. The idea that this is a de-radicalization medium is obviously really silly. But it's the standard Contra Points line. Says nothing, indicates nothing, carefully steps in between what is acceptable discourse for moderate Democrats and radical communists, hand wrings over radicalized right-wing young men, as usual. Looking horrible, looking like, I mean, looking like the court castrato on, the last hit of opium in the Ming Dynasty, sitting back there, vacant look in the eyes, going through the motions of what, and all throughout is peppered in little things. Like the big ideas Contra Points has is how the Democratic Party could do dishonest and illiberal things to regain power and con young men back into voting for them, even though it would obviously be against their interest. And so eventually the subject gets back to the subject of young men and youth culture and how it is going right for young men. This is obviously the crazy thing about the whole endeavor we're facing in the modern era is we constantly talk about the radicalization of young men when all available evidence shows that it's the women who have radicalized, insofar as women don't get radicalized, they get energized. Men get radicalized, women get energized. All of their radical notions are just a justified response to the hardships that are just implicit in being a woman. But young men, they're scary and radicalized. And Natalie Wynn starts talking about the based ritual. And then I do a double take here. and I started thinking to myself, wait a minute. Okay, the based ritual, this is what Lauren Southern said people on the alt-right were doing in 2016 in their private group chats. Okay, Contra Points, were you all, I mean, maybe Contra Points was in the alt-right group chats, throwing down racist slurs to prove that they had creds. That sounds like something that they would do as a creeper extraordinaire on the internet, who's basically a professional YouTuber 1 month after they started doing it, because leftists were so hungry for anybody that could point a camera competently and then give a little leftist spiel making fun of the golden one. But why are you using the exact same words as Lauren Southern. Like, it's the base ritual. It's the base ritual. It's the base word again and again and again and again and again. And then it hit me. Okay. It was Richard Hanania. Richard Hanania. That's obviously what this whole thing is. That this is the base ritual was an article that Richard Hanania wrote a year ago about how right wingers essentially had to performatively be edgy, and that this edginess was crowding out their ordinary thought. And now, of course, you know, since Richard Hanania wrote the article about how just needlessly edgy thought was crowding out ordinary steely-eyed analysis of politics and ideas, and the discussions of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas or Thomas Carlyle, and comparing him to John Rawls and the other great philosophers of the ages, we were just so distracted by the end towers, we forgot to do the hard philosophical work. Then Richard Hanania spends almost all of his time and career, defending pedophilia and bestiality. Much like Destiny. This is the level of discourse. But the thing that it proved to me, at least, Lauren Southern isn't remembering a specific thing that happened in 2017, and neither is Contra Points. They're both just reading off lines from Richard Hanania. They're getting this from a common group chat. Who reads Richard Hanania organically? Really, who reads Richard Hanania organically? Nobody. Nobody reads this person. This person has no fan base. There are a few times that Richard Hanania has been in the neighborhood, either on the West Coast or on the East Coast, and my friends have gone to one of his events, and it is basically no one shows up. He has to go with somebody else. Like, when he goes and talks with Curtis Yarvin, there's a good turnout, but nobody's there to see Richard Hanania. Everyone is there to see Curtis Yarvin. The guy has no organic following except in these narrow corridors of certain people who are trying to break into the elite. And those people who are trying to break into the elite are people like Contra Points and Lauren Southern, who are kind of reading off a common script. And this video, both of these videos, these terrible, terrible videos, were just kind of echoing in my mind. And I remember mentioning that to my wife over dinner just an hour ago. I hope she's not angry at me talking about this. That just hearing Lauren Southern, with all her scandals, try to scandalize Andrew Wilson for saying mean words was enough to make me support Andrew Wilson when I hadn't otherwise. I'm fine with him, but actually be a fan just by hearing Lauren Southern bash him. And immediately my wife has this incredibly negative reaction to Andrew Wilson. And we go, and I just hear her thoughts on how Andrew Wilson is so fake. And he's just a scourge on women everywhere. Perhaps a common reaction. It kind of put me in mind of just how politics doesn't move and the way we think. My wife doesn't like Andrew Wilson because he's mean. It's that simple, right? She doesn't disagree with anything, any ideas he says. She doesn't disagree with him. Probably we have some theological disagreements. We're Catholic, he's Orthodox, but I don't think that the filioque ever really comes up. She doesn't like Andrew Wilson because he's mean. She doesn't like Andrew Wilson because he's mean. And the big thing, the big common feature of both these things is, and I kind of re-listened to a little bit of the Lauren Southern podcast and the Doom Scroll podcast, and all I could hear is just like women talking, and I'm including Contra Points in the category of women due to extreme spiritual effeminacy, but we could include, what is the guy from Doom Scroll? I forget what, Jonathan Citarella. That's his name. Citarella, isn't it? If ever there was a spiritually effeminate person, that would be him. But they're just sitting around there looking at a situation that is naturally radicalizing. And they're getting angry because people are being mean. People are not signaling the right things. People, like, they don't have any arguments about what needs to be done. They don't have any arguments about the things that need to change. They understand that the systems that they defend are unsustainable. They just don't want anyone to be mean about it. They don't want anyone to be mean about it because they think that meanness indicates something. I mean, every single chat, every single social organization, every single group of people has a way of proving who are the worthwhile individuals from the people who are kind of tourists, people who are just there to see things, maybe exploit the situation. And I guess for a hot moment in 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019, the ritual that proved you were a member of the right was essentially saying bad words. And to a certain extent, when it comes to Andrew Wilson and Joel Webben, hoe scaring is part of their brand. That's what they do. They go out and they make women upset. But women upset is the core of everything that doom scroll and Lauren Southern seem to be upset about. That the worst sin imaginable, according to Lauren Southern's version of Christianity, isn't lying or cheating on your spouse or misrepresenting your ideas or lying to your own audience again and again and again. It's not accusing women of being rape fabricators and then either not reporting a rape that happened to you or sitting on it and not pressing charges, which Lauren Southern must be guilty of one of those things. All of those sins Lauren Southern has been guilty of again and again and again. But she's not mean to women. She doesn't scare hoes. So that kind of makes her more of a Christian, doesn't it? Or at least according to the people who run the moderate podcasts. I think there's a problem, obviously, with how we're communicating. And I'll go on with this. Where do I want to begin? I haven't done this for weeks now, and no, for months almost. The discussion of current events, and inside the discussion of current events, the big happening has been the war in Iran, and this is. It's an interesting lesson for those of us on the right. And it just shows you how far away we are from being the kind of people who can genuinely wield power in an effective way. On the surface, the war in Iran is the destruction of everything that Trump promised to be, in my opinion. I'm going to now discuss my opinions about it at length. Well, I'll get this. This is going to get a little spicy. Not really. No, I'm not going to say anything here that hasn't said, that everyone hasn't said a million times before on other channels. MAGA is supposed to be America first. MAGA is supposed to be an end of stupid forever wars. It is supposed to be a strengthening of the American project and a simultaneous stepping away from utopian projects, both neocon and leftist, that have otherwise completely destroyed the West. Now, Trump has had a lot of failures on this front. The main failures, in my opinion, have been in foreign policy. He has European leaders who are sympathetic to him, to his project. Instead of bringing them to his side and helping them gain power in their countries, he immediately alienates them, creating an unnecessary division between European conservatives, European right-wingers, and American right-wingers. He misses out on multiple opportunities to actually take charge of the foreign policy establishment and do something new and positive. And I mean, to kind of put the cherry on top of the shit sundae, he essentially let his entire foreign policy establishment get controlled by neocons and Zionists. And the war in Iran is just the perfect example of this. It's, I mean, the other great failing of Trump is his inability to end the Ukraine war, which I'm not so sure that I can really, that's obviously what I wanted. I wanted an end to the Ukraine war. I'm not so sure how much I can blame Trump for that failure, even though he did promise it. But I can certainly blame him for beginning the war in Iran. And it's not just that it's a stupid war, it's that the war is obviously for the benefit of Israel. And I mean, it's very hard. And look, if you are aligned with Israel, or if you are yourself Jewish, uh, we're in the middle of a war that it's impossible to argue is not just a war to directly help Israeli Zionist interests at the expense of the West and pretty much everyone else who lives in this world. That's what this war in Iran is. And I know you're not responsible for the crimes of Benjamin Netanyahu, but now we finally have, as is the title of the Josephus history, we finally have a Jewish war. And people are asking themselves, is this the first Jewish war that we've fought? Iran is a Jewish war. Was Iraq a Jewish war? Were any other wars in the 20th century essentially similarly lobbied for? This is a question that I don't have an answer for, but it's a question that everyone is thinking. And I don't really want to dwell on the larger narrative implications when it comes to the relationship that Americans and other Westerners have to the Zionist project writ large. But the thing is that the Trump promise is effectively over because, I mean, I guess he can try to pull it out of the fire. He can try to end the war really quickly and try to resume normalcy, which does not look like it's going to happen. First of all, that's the exact opposite of what Benjamin Netanyahu wants. Benjamin Netanyahu wants us to be involved in another forever war, indefinitely bombing and then calling a ceasefire and bombing Iran on and on and on and on, if he cannot encourage us to actually do a regime change by commencing a ground war, which I think is a bridge too far for Trump. But the idea that we're going to call a permanent peace settlement seems to be very far-fetched at this time, which means that it's going to be global chaos economically worldwide, a potential energy crisis, a potential collapse of the global economy. And on top of that, almost certainly a very justified fracturing of the MAGA coalition. MAGA is comprised of two elements. One of them is ordinary American conservative patriots. We'll call them the conservative patriot wing. My friend Charlemagne did an article on the Old Glory Club blog explaining this distinction. The other side of the equation is the America First faction. Perhaps the more deep right people, but also the people who see the first step as being a consolidation of American interests in America. Now, look, when I consider Trump's foreign policies to be a failure, at least in the first year of his presidency. His failures were largely failures of consolidating a global right-wing alternative to the reigning axis that is the EU and the US State Department. And, obviously there are rivals in China and Russia. That in addition to the EU State Department axis and the Xi Jinping axis and the Vladimir Putin axis, there would be a new political axis of power that was organized around the American right wing, the European right wing, the world of nations, against mass immigration, for secure borders, for a pursuit of human interests above those of just rank economic growth, raw GDP, inflation. That was the vision. We lost out on that because Trump was basically still stuck in this adversarial frame with Europe. I don't think he had a long enough view. But you could still frame that as America first. So no necessary division. That's just Trump being not as ambitious, a little bit disappointing in my opinion. This war in Iran there's no way this could proceed to American interests. Period. The only person this benefits is Benjamin Netanyahu. That's the only person that this war benefits. Period. And Trump has been played like a fool. Now, the patriot side of this equation, the conservative patriot side of this equation, which is, most boomers, so a majority of the Republican coalition, because the Republican coalition is largely very old, is still on board with this war, and they're still supporting him. But Trump's going to lose all his youth energy. Trump is going to lose all his youth energy, all his ability to organize on the ground. It will bleed away as this war proceeds, and this war will proceed. Again, I can't predict the future, but leaving out a miracle, which I certainly pray for, leaving out a miracle that bestows peace, Trump is in an indefinite quagmire. And while that quagmire persists, nobody is going to imagine some kind of alternative coalition forming inside of America. Progressives are weak. They're weaker than they ever have been. Their institutions are broken. And even the immigrants that they've brought in aren't as loyal and as organizable as they would have hoped. The future of organized politics in North America is up for grabs. The great opportunity now that Trump has squandered with this war in Iran is to create a populist coalition that brought together low immigration, demographic security, cultural and physical health, targeting of high birth rates, in addition to just getting America healthy along other axes, and a refocus on labor. A coalition like that could have redefined the political landscape in America, and it's gone. Because you're not going to get a coalition like that when an enormous amount of our economic resources are being squandered directly and indirectly in this war with Iran. Nobody from the left is going to think that there is a future entering into a coalition that obviously jumps whenever Benjamin Netanyahu says jump. No one's going to buy that. Well, you're gonna discard your DNC slave masters for neocon slave masters. No one's going to buy that. There is no future for an alternative political coalition. And the problem is that the promise of MAGA, the promise of Trump was maybe, just maybe, we could redesign the political landscape and prevent the Democrat Party from winning not only in 2020, but also in 2030 and 2034 and for a decade, to totally redesign the American government the way that FDR did. Now, that was a very big long shot. But given some of the demographic trends that we had seen in 2024, it was a possibility. And the idea was that calmer heads would have prevailed inside the Trump administration. And they would have gone forward with something that looked somewhat like this. Some plan to give, no one likes J.D. Vance. I mean, he's not a very popular candidate. But you could see J.D. Vance leading a Trumpian coalition into the future with, if everything went perfectly, right? And I know that his connections to Peter Thiel and all of those nefarious Silicon Valley people should not be dismissed. But I'm speaking optimistically. I'm speaking about what was the great promise. Now, obviously, that's not the case. Now, obviously, with MAGA and with America First and the Patriot Conservatives dividing MAGA, there's not going to be a coalition even on the right, let alone one that could attract a sizable population of the left. The Democrats will certainly sweep in 2028. And if they don't get it in 2028 and the war continues, they'll certainly get it in 2030. And then we are back to mass immigration again. We are back to all of the shenanigans that the deep state does. We are back to tech censorship. And that's what you can hear Natalie Wynn and Jonathan Citarella. Oh, well, we need to censor the tech platforms to keep out radicalism, like right-wing radicalism. You can see that, and they're phrasing it very benignly at this stage. We're just going to get rid of their ability to use algorithmic recommendations. Contra Points knows that the reason why right-wing content creators exploded in 2015 to 2018 was not because they were getting favored by the algorithm. It was because there was a major political backlash. You either break social media, absolutely, which might be a boon for the human race, but certainly would not be an across the board boon for the left, because social media keeps their guys as much energized as ours. You either destroy social media for what it is, you leave it as it is, which of course the Democrats will not do, or you pursue what the Biden administration was toying with in the 2021 to 2023 years, which is a soft censorship of the internet in one way, shape, or form. That's obviously what they're going to pursue. That's the obvious thing that they're going to pursue. Will they ultimately be successful? Somehow I also doubt that, just because of the extreme incompetence of the Democratic Party. But it is obviously what they're going for. That is obviously the next step. All of that stuff will be back. And in their victory, the first step on their victory was essentially Trump's decision to go to war in Iran. And nothing is gained from it. Iran will not be look, a regime change would not probably improve Iran. It certainly didn't improve Iraq. It certainly did not improve Libya. I don't think it improved Syria. From everything I hear, it made Syria a whole lot worse, even if you do not include the very, very bloody civil war that existed for 10 years as the cost of finally ousting Assad. But you can't get a regime change in Iran. It's impossible. The country is practically not invadable by conventional forces. Their army is too strong. Their entire landscape is comprised of mountains. And so all you're doing now is all you're doing is just decapitating Iran again and again and again with these little drone strikes and bombing campaigns that land on children's schools, that land on schools for girls, so you can kill octogenarian ayatollahs and accomplish absolutely nothing. And we sacrificed a large part of our time frame for reclaiming North America and Europe for the kind of future that we want for our children, because Benjamin Netanyahu had to have his way. And look, ultimately, I avoided talking about the war in Iran for a month because that's what I had to say about it. But that's not really relevant to anybody here. I mean, I guess my big disappointment with this war in Iran thing is just how also right-wingers behaved. Immediately afterwards, gets me to my next point here. Well, it would help if I hit the right button. I denounce the dissident right. Oh my God. It's so empowering to say that. Let's all say it together. Clap your hands if you denounce the dissident right. Clap your hands if you denounce the dissident right. Maybe I'll clip that. No, I denounce the dissident right. This is every single person for the last month since we started the stupid war has been saying that. And I don't know exactly what they hope to accomplish with this. This is an absolute mystery to me. So the sort of biggest news story in I think the last month that we're going to talk about tonight, and we'll touch on other things, has been the fracturing and the MAGA civil war. And it started with people like Academic Agent, denouncing the dissident right, and half a dozen other people, I denounce the dissident right. And I think this is qualitatively different than what was happening a year or 2 years back with the Alex Kashuda, Lauren Southern gang, the sort of the women of the dissident right that retired from making useful blog entries and interesting interview shows and decided to become part-time expose sources for the New York Times and the New Yorker magazine. This is qualitatively, those people like Lauren Southern, and I don't know, the other people who shall not be mentioned, who kind of defected from the right to the left wing because they were just so tired of this policy or that. They obviously were angling themselves to ingratiate themselves with the mainstream, with the mainstream publishing houses like the New York Times, the Chuck Schumer types, the establishment government, the moderate Democrats, the people who run places like Doom Scroll and the Know Your Enemy podcast and the editorial staff of New Yorker Magazine and the New York Times, the kinds of people who probably all fund Richard Hanania when he's not getting, grants from USAID mysteriously. And this is the government talking to itself. The people who talk about the based ritual that was going on in 2018, even though none of them were in right-wing group chats in 2018. Those defections had a point. I understood what they were for. This was the sort of, I tried to be radical in college because it was cool and had a lot of energy, but then I got bored and I really, really, really would rather have powerful people throw me a bone and be in the good kids club again, especially since so many people are just saying mean, mean, mean words. And as we know, nothing is worse than saying mean words to women. That is the least Christian thing you could possibly do. You could be like Lauren Southern and, tear apart your family and lie to your fans and either not report a rape or fabricate one, whatever it is. And you're still more Christian than the people who say mean words to women. That is the ethical standard by which we judge all things. And look, those defections that occurred last year, they had a point to them. I could see tactically what the people were going for. They wanted to switch sides. They realized what everyone realizes who does right-wing stuff, that the right wing does not have power. We do not pay. If you're on the left, you fail upwards. When you're on the right and you fail, you're on your own. No one's going to come to your aid. And a lot of people get gun shy about that, especially if you're of the fair sex. It's a very difficult position to be in, to realize that you are essentially going to feel the full force of elite disapproval. And you've never entertained that publicly in your entire life up until this stage. And you get gun shy and you move. I understand that. I do not really understand the latest crop of I denounce the dissident right type things. The academic agent thing. I mean, I was over this when it originally dropped, just before I did the Twitter fast. What is academic? Who is he fooling? The New York Times isn't going to think that he's progressive, but neither are communists. They're not going to ally with him. The dissident right is just whoever irritates me is in the dissident right. But I think more fundamentally, I think people don't really understand what politics is and what we're trying to do at discussing it online or really doing anything online. People treat politics like it is, I'm going to skip forward here a little bit. People treat politics like it is, like it's creating a brand. Okay, so, I have my brand for my social media account. And then I create another, then this brand called MAGA isn't testing very well because it's obviously broken. MAGA is now essentially a broken political coalition. So I don't want to be associated with this toxic brand, so I'm going to have to find a new brand. So the old brand was called Dissident Right. So in order to create a new brand, I denounce the Dissident Right. And that will magically create for me a new brand. But it doesn't. It doesn't. And you see this when it comes to people talking about how would another coalition be formed. Now, initially, I'm going to phrase this a little bit carefully, kind of narrate things. So as everyone knows, there was the initial break between the Patriots and the America Firsters. And as I mentioned, the Old Glory Club, which is an organization that I've been associated with from the start, stepped in to kind of try to make the best out of a bad situation. They understood, like I think we all do, the disaster that will happen when the MAGA coalition falls apart, which it 90% probability it will. But we have to make good with what we have. So a lot of people, responsible people, tried to step in and fill the breach. And most notable among them was my friend Charlemagne, who was writing for the Old Glory Club's blog. And I think everyone should subscribe. They do a lot of good stuff. I'm not so sure I'm a fan of their gaming streams. No offense, guys. But, you know, I really like their articles. They've been able to put forward a lot of writers that never got a shot beforehand, and they're a model for my own efforts at community building with the California Redwood Society. And Charlemagne, he wrote this article. I mean, it was a perfectly fine article. If I had one criticism of it, it would be that it was boring, right? Like it was all this kind of common sense stuff, right? And Charlemagne's written a number of really interesting and exciting articles. He's not a boring writer, but if I had a criticism of his article, it would be that it was just like common sense stuff. And so he publishes this on the Old Glory Club Substack, and then just a few days, I think this is the week of Easter, just afterwards, Palm Sunday, I think it was. But this went on for like a week. There was just this rage among the America Firsters. So, these are the people, or a certain subset of them, right? A certain subset of the America Firsters that were tangentially in the orbit of people like Nick Fuentes, this weird Afghani gay blogger called Bazillion Thought, a few other people I'm gonna see, Meta Prime was another one of them, and a few other people I won't mention who were previously friendly to the Old Glory Club. They saw this article and they just went completely apoplectic, and it was impossible to figure out what they were angry about. And they were raging because they thought that this article was an example of subversion. A subversion on the part of the OGC, of all the people who were associated with it, of Charlemagne, of, weirdly enough, Aaron McIntyre. And I'm just kind of taking all of this in, this absolute spurg out. These are people, and I don't want to name all the names because I feel it'll exacerbate the conflict as it was. But this was sort of the height of the division that I saw it online. And when I kind of realized just how backwards people are, they were just making up stories about people being subversive actors. They were making up stories about Aaron McIntyre being a subversive actor because he works for the Blaze, and Glenn Beck is a boomer Zionist. They were making up stories about the OGC being subverted, like just total fabrications, like based on nothing. And the idea is that, like, we can tell just, and this was they're quoting this thing like media markets. And I've seen this guy called Bazillion Thought talk about this. Like every single person who's in this sphere, if they're not 100% focused on being anti-Zionist, then they're essentially a psyop. And we have this cute little Just So story about how their development on the scene was a result of deep state forces, of NGOs that are affiliated with Zionism in Israel, of them kind of learning from what they were seeing in terms of what people wanted to click on, and then promoting people who would fill that narrative and keep people neutralized and not anti-Zionist. Great. And so, initially it's fine because I am not Zionist. I have, as I've made clear in the first part of this live stream, I think the war in Iran is a disaster. It is obviously the work of Benjamin Netanyahu and other Zionist lobbyists inside the Trump administration. Perhaps even in the American, well, not perhaps, almost certainly in the American deep state, like the State Department, who were lobbying for this war on the behalf of Israel. Subversion is a problem. There also are, I would say, people who are particularly bad actors. I've already mentioned Richard Hanania. Richard Hanania is obviously a bad actor. James Lindsay is obviously a bad actor. Joel Berry is obviously, I feel kind of bad about that one. Joel Berry might be a bad actor, or he might just be an idiot. But if so, he's so autistic and such an idiot, he might as well be a bad actor. I mean, and we'll go into this. I'll go into this now. Those people are bad actors, in my opinion, and I'll explain why. Fair enough. We agree that there are perverse Zionist influences on government. We agree that there are bad actors that are compromised by essentially their funding sources. They're not being honest. They're lying. And that's what really we're looking for when we look for bad actors. We look for people who lie to their audience, who promote positions that are inconsistent, who don't try to engage with their opponents in good faith and communicate an idea, who are promoting obvious double standards, who can't be morally consistent, and who constantly they basically decide on their outcome first. We need to be in support of Israel, and then they decide what's popular second, like what's trending in the news today, what will get the clicks, what I need to say in order to make the algorithm run, and then their entire job is connecting what their patrons want them to say with what the algorithm will pay them to say, and then that's their article. That's like every Richard Hanania article. Every Richard Hanania article is a compromise between those two forces, which is why, although any single Richard Hanania article kind of sort of makes sense when you read it individually, if you look at the broad swath of his intellectual output, it all contradicts itself. And the same thing is true with James Lindsay. James Lindsay figures out who is, very ironically, since he hates Carl Schmitt, he figures out who his friends and enemies are, and then he concocts his theory around painting his enemies in the worst picture imaginable. That's how he ends up calling an Arby's sandwich woke right. That's how he discovers that R.N. McIntyre is a Zoroastrian angel summoner. That's his entire ideology. It's all backward from those first principles. But, the problem is that in addition to the people I think who are demonstrably bad actors, anybody can tell a just so story about how somebody is matching a media market. So I was initially really interested in Bazillion Thought, that's his name, on Twitter. I really liked him. I saw him on The Backlash, a few other places. He told a really great story. He was anti-Zionist. And, look, maybe it's the California upbringing. Maybe it's because I have the gay lisp. But when they're not adopting children, I do find a lot of gay men kind of charming in conversation, at least when they're on a topic that they know something about. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I kind of like this guy. But this is the thing, right? Like what Bazillion does is he starts with some actor and he decides that they're a bad actor. Maybe Richard Hanania, maybe James Lindsay. And then what he does is he tells a just so story about how their presence in the idea space is a result of foreign elements trying to meet a media market. And so this is great because he was talking about people who I kind of already knew from reading their articles for a very long time, that they had been compromised, that they were not being consistent, that they were lying. And so the just so story was a good explanation of why they were lying. But the problem is that it only takes one or two of these just so stories for you to see how the formula is absolutely a crock of shit. Because eventually he tells you a just so story that can't be true. So the just so story, I remember this on one of Bazillion Thought's interviews from about 6 months back. And he was going about, do you remember the alt-right from 2016? I think he was talking to Richard Spencer at the time. And he was talking to one of those old, it wasn't Spencer, it was somebody else, but he was on a podcast. And everyone's like, oh yeah, that was a really great time. We had so much momentum on our side. And then Hailgate happened, and then Charlottesville happened, and then all the momentum went away. And Bazillion Thought's like, oh, whoa, that's not an accident. You say, when Hailgate happened and Charlottesville happened, they had all of the alt-right guys, spill their guts about what they wanted to see, about how they felt so powerless and how they felt that democracy wasn't responsive for them. And then pretty soon, in response to the alt-right to fill that media market, along comes this mysterious guy called Mencius Moldbug selling a theory about how you could get power through elite theory. And Curtis Yarvin came onto the scene to fill the media market gap that was left by the alt-right. And I hear Bazillion Thought say this. Like that literal narrative is part of his story. And I've been doing this for 15 years at least. And you're like, that is the biggest crockish. Like, is a time machine involved in this? I was reading Mencius Moldbug before anyone knew who Richard Spencer was in 2011. The blog Unqualified, that began in 2008? Steve Saylor was talking about him in 2008. So what, did they go back in time? That was a popular blog back in the day, Mencius Moldbug. It was a little bit fringe. It was a little bit, it was like weird Silicon Valley. How could he be a right winger in Silicon Valley? That was kind of the deal, right? Everyone from Silicon Valley is either supposed to be a socialist or a libertarian. That's how this stuff always works. And there's this weird right wing guy writing from Silicon Valley. It was a niche thing, but it was very, very well known. People talked about it all the time. I was not the first person to popularize Mencius Moldbug in 2019. Absolutely not. People were talking about this all the time. It was a very popular blog. Again, not as popular as Yarvin eventually became in the 2020s. But no, we have this Justo theory, and the reason why we're picking Yarvin is because we know that Yarvin's talked to Peter Thiel. Like, that's the connection. That's how the Justo story works. So if we can do a 6 degree of connection between you and Peter Thiel, then you're part of an influencer network that's nefariously being used to fill a media market. This is just absolute hogwash, and it just keeps on going, right? For every story that these people like MetaPrime tell me that seems somewhat believable about how people like James Lindsay are paid subversives, they tell another story that I know to be false, either because I literally know the people involved, or because I have like a working understanding of how cause and effect works. And he's saying that that effects precede their cause, or because he's saying that organizations that I have literally had a hand in founding are connected to patronage networks that I know they aren't connected to. And so all of this is just total bullshit. It's done so that people can create a brand. And I'm frustrated with these people. And every time I participate in this conversation online, and I've done so about 4 times in the last month or last 3 weeks since Easter. It's been 3 weeks since Easter, right? I've gone back and forth with these people, and accusations are thrown out. I come back, I refute the accusations, and then all the fans are like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe you're right, but you really have to talk to Bazillion Thought. You really have to talk to MetaPrime. You really have to talk to any other number of people. I have thrown invitations out for them to come on or for me to go on their podcast. I basically said, look, if you're an established media presence and you have these concerns and you want to talk about media markets, I'll come on your podcast and talk to you about that thing. And all of them have refused. Basil himself, Bazillion Thought, said no, and then he said yes, and then he gave me a date, and I cleared my my dinner plans with my family. I had a hike planned, I canceled it, and then he DMs me an hour before this podcast is supposed to go live and tells me that he can't make it because he's busy through the rest of the entire month. Well, that's just perfect. And it's so convenient because in that month where he was supposed to be so busy that he couldn't possibly schedule a podcast with me to talk about the subversion he says are going on and organizations that I know about, he's done like 3 podcasts with other people. This is, and furthermore, like, and people are like, oh, well, you need to DM him again and make more time to go on his podcast. No, I don't. And look, I'm not saying that you can't cancel a podcast appearance. I've done it before too. I've had emergencies. I've had kids that had to go. I've had a kid who's had to go to the emergency room. I've had things come up. But look, I mean, if you make an accusation, schedule a podcast, and then cancel it an hour before, I'm not going hat in hand to beg you for another appearance. You have to reach out to me. This whole thing is just transparently people who are trying to keep a controversy going for as long as possible. They do not have the receipts to back up half of their accusations. Maybe they have one, right? But they're just doing what Milo Yiannopoulos did. Like, do people remember Milo Yiannopoulos? Do people remember why that does not work? Milo Yiannopoulos is a scandal monger. You go around and you accuse everybody of having scandals based on rumors. And then what do? Well, the rumors that turn out to be founded, you show up with evidence and you do a data drop and you destroy them. And everyone hails you as a prophet. But then the 5 or 6 or 7 rumors that end up being false, you just stop talking about, people forget about them, and they go away. As long as you don't get on a podcast with a stickler who wants to hold your feet to the fire. This whole thing is an absolute waste of time. And so many people are getting drawn into this when they should be thinking about other productive things to do about with their lives and with their energy. When they should be thinking about how do we forge a new coalition, all they're doing is doing these little yarn diagrams that they can trace everyone back to Peter Thiel. Aaron McIntyre is a Peter Thiel agent because he works for Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck's a Zionist, and Glenn Beck's talked to Peter Thiel. Well, guess what? I work a day job, and my CEO is an absolute liberal. He's a progressive. I guarantee he has worse opinions than Glenn Beck does. I don't know if he's a Zionist. He probably is. Does that make me a Zionist? I mean, how does this whole contraption work? It doesn't work. It's not designed to do anything except indict everybody, and then basically kill them all and let God sort them out. And speak of media markets, none of the people who do this stuff actually want to talk to me about how to build effective fraternal organizations, effective local organizations, and coordination for a new coalition. None of them want to talk to me about this because all they want to talk about is their next little edgy conspiracy theory about how this person or that is 6 degrees of separation from Benjamin Netanyahu or Peter Thiel. That's it. And maybe I'll talk about this a little bit more later. I'm you can tell I'm still angry about this. But this gets into a larger problem, a larger controversy that's erupted between Matt Walsh and Nick Fuentes. Now, I always feel torn about Nick Fuentes. He's obviously a very talented man. But he also has a lot of flaws. And, I really don't like this thing. This is the same thing that I have a much higher opinion of Joel Webbin, and I have a much higher opinion of Andrew Wilson. And I like to think I'm a fan. I like to think I'm a friend of P.F. Young, even though I am not really a fan of his work. And one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of his work is he does the same thing as the other 2 characters do. And the same thing as Nick Fuentes does. He makes provocative statements that he doesn't really believe in, or he takes statements that he believes in and he facetiously exaggerates them and distorts them in certain ways to drive the algorithm. I hate this. And this is one of the things that really gets me about Nick Fuentes. And the thing that it's not the only thing that I have a problem. It's not my only problem I have with Nick Fuentes, but it becomes very, very difficult to sort of talk to the man or his people because you feel like you're constantly caught up in this maelstrom of algorithmically manufactured controversy that just kind of exists everywhere around Nick Fuentes. It's always total chaos. It's never calm consideration. It's always this edgy opinion or that. And, he gets into a debate with Matt Walsh. And maybe I'll give some background on this because I was going to cover this anyway. One of the big things that was that happened this week, I guess, was, let's just be honest, gay men being gay men happened this week. There was not one instance, but there were several. I'm going to focus on the one that I actually know happened this week, and that was not just a rehash of previous events. But we've all known that this surrogacy industry is heavily abused by gay men. And a lot of them become parents that, first of all, I don't think based on my religious principles and based on just common sense, I don't think that gay men should be adopting through surrogacy at all. I don't really think surrogacy should exist as an industry. The abuses are more common than the cases that are actually healthy in surrogacy. And there's no way to really extricate the abusive cases from the practices we would ordinarily want to use to help infertile married couples conceive. And I'm saying that with my Catholic hat off, because obviously just the amount of abortion that's involved in conceiving through surrogacy would kind of ethically prohibit it anyway. But that being said, it's just so obvious when it comes to gay men that in an enormous number of the cases, not only is the practice sort of abstractly bad, these men are doing really creepy things with these kids. They're treating them like props in their own Instagram stories. This guy, McAnally. I can't believe this. This must be a simulation that I'm in. We're in a simulation when we're talking about the abuses of gay surrogacy, and the poster boy for gay surrogacy is literally named McAnally. Right along there with Pete Buttigieg, McAnally. Yes, I'll have Ligma Johnson as the next gay couple. The next gay dad who will have a scandal right after Mike Oxlong, and we'll go down the list from there. But Shane McAnally is having problems because there are now numerous videos of him taunting his children for not having a mother. There's another video of him going around today about him quizzing his children on how horny their dads are. And these are kids that shouldn't be old enough to even know about sex or talk about it. And they're rating their dad's sex lives. It's insane stuff. This guy already is a celebrity in the public eye. It's like millstone territory we're in. And of course, this caused a big backlash. And this is another problem with the right wing. I think there's a Substack sphere where we have like very, very intellectual conversations. And a lot of my energy has been going into the Substack, which I think has been very rewarding. But so much of all of this stuff is just us relearning basic reality. How many conversations about immigration and nationhood is just us unlearning blank slate theory? Like, you think you unlearn it, like Joel Berry, right? You think you unlearn blank slate theory, but then like you don't really unlearn it. So when I was in a conversation with what's his face? Joel Berry, was a year and a half ago. And he says up front, I don't believe in blank slate theory. I take your point about the Charles Murray stuff, the possibility of HBD. Let's concede all that. And then 1 minute he says that, and the next minute he tells me that if you took a boat full of average Nigerians and shipped them into New York, they would, with the right education circumstances, become just as American as you or I. So he doesn't really understand blank slate theory. And, I guess to kind of regress a little bit, when I say something like James Lindsay or Richard Hanania or Lauren Southern or Joel Berry, that they're actually acting like subversives. I don't say that because I'm like bazillion thought and I used a bunch of yarn and pins to connect them to Peter Thiel or Benjamin Netanyahu through like 6 degrees a second Kevin Bacon logic. And it's not because I told a Just So story about how they chronologically filled a media market that needed to be filled, even if the chronology doesn't make sense, as it doesn't in Curtis Yarvin's case. I don't do that when I say these people are subversive. When I say that Joel Berry is subversive, what I mean is that he has a habit of actively contradicting himself and then not acknowledging that he's had a change of thought. So that means that you're either James Lindsay, it's obvious, right? James Lindsay frequently contradicts himself. He frequently makes incorrect predictions and does not take ownership of it. Lauren Southern basically recasts herself every 2 years and denounces the people that she previously worked with. She has a track record of, I don't know, I mean, she must have lied at one stage of these developments, because at every stage she says things, and at the next stage of reinventing herself, she says the exact opposite. And sometimes they're about just events that have happened to her. So she's certainly lying. She's either lying the first time or she's lying the second time. And, or you're like Richard Hanania, where it's just this pattern of motivated contradictions again and again and again and again and again. And you know, when you're doing things like that, when you're forgetting basic concepts, I think that the only explanation when you're not showing any intellectual humility, you're not engaging with a conversation, you're not making the right moves to actually be a person who cares about truth and defend your controversial opinions, and all you're doing is leaving your audiences in the long term with a bunch of statements that don't make sense together, then I think you're being subversive, whether it is because you're actually trying to subvert the conversation or whether you're stupid. But that's a digression here. What I'm trying to say is that so much of our conversations, when it comes to things like gay surrogacy or dating discourses, or the dynamics between men and women, or foreign policy, or immigration, or economics, or take your pick on anything. When it comes to any one of those topics, half of it is just, we've all been raised with a certain perspective on things through the media and through our schooling. And we constantly have to remind ourselves that reality is real. So the thing is that we're all raised in a media environment, at least I was, that says gay men are really, really upstanding, really, really conscientious citizens. They're really, really, they're like straight men, but they're less perverted, and they're more clean, and they're more conscientious, and they're more trustworthy, and they're less sexually deviant, ironically enough. That's the story we're raised with, to believe about gay men. None of that is true. I mean, other than potentially being more neat from a grooming point of view, on average, I'm not saying that there aren't highly conscientious, highly ethical gay people out there, but on average, these people have, they tend to be less honest, they tend to be less well put together, they tend to have huge problems with drugs and alcohol, in my experience. They tend to lie about their history a lot. And I'm sorry, this is another thing that's sort of observable about gay men. They tend to be more creepy than straight men. Women don't perceive them to be as creepy because they don't see them as a sexual threat. But if you were to objectively observe gay men and their behavior, you would notice way more creepy, intrusive behavior that disrespected boundaries than you would in straight men. It's obvious. It's obvious. We're culturally conditioned not to see this. And so every time we see like these gay couples being creepy weirdos around their children, we have to relearn that this is kind of how gay men are. I mean, again, not universally, but a lot of gay men are like this. And it's impossible to unlearn this. And so, of course, there's a big shock. And right at the head of this, right at the head of this big shock is Matt Walsh. And, I think we were just talking about abortion too. I think that was in the news. I can't remember how, but between abortion and the abuses of children and surrogacy and all this other stuff and any number of other sexually demented practices probably figured into this, Matt Walsh said, well, my coalition is everybody who's sane on this issue. This is the first step. This is how you get a foot into the door. Anyone who's against this is on my side. And this goes back to sort of Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes kind of, the first response was quite poignant on Nick's part. He said, well, really, isn't the big thing that's tearing apart the coalition of the right in America the war in Iran? Isn't the big question whether America even has sovereignty as a country? Well, we're worried about gay men being creepy somewhere, in a house that you have no control over. The entire future of your children is being lost to immigration and to malign foreign policy. The global fallout from the economic bubble that's probably going to pop this year or the next is going to crush us. The coming energy crisis and crunch. All of these horrible things. Surveillance by Palantir to bring Peter Thiel and the Silicon Valley crew back into it. And Nick Fuentes poignantly asked, well, isn't America first the big boundary for the coalition? Isn't that where we have to start building our coalitions? I mean, it's well said, it's well thought. And Matt said, well, no, and what's ironic is that, this would never have happened a year ago. Even a year ago, Matt Walsh would have never replied to a Nick Fuentes reply. And if he did reply to a Nick Fuentes reply, it certainly would not be as conciliatory as the reply he gave just this week was. And if I'm paraphrasing the response from Walsh, but it was something to the effect that I'm going to butcher this, forgive me. But Matt Walsh made the case that, look, I'm against the Iran war. I'm against the abuses of Palantir. I'm obviously against mass migration. But what I'm trying to establish is a baseline understanding of morality. There's tons of people in this world who hate Israel and still also hate me and my children, and who want to have babies dismembered in the womb, and who are perfectly fine with them being in these abusive situations. We have to start with morality first. And, Nick made a practical political point about why this is what will never have a good political coalition in this country, because we're so obsessed with morality that we cannot really see through to the real issue, which is, of course, opposition to Zionism. Now, look, I think both sides have a point here. One of my big disappointments with Nick is that, as steely-eyed and as realist as he looks on this issue right now, he's not very consistent about it. He says that mass migration is just a number one issue for the coalition. 3 months ago or 4 months ago, he was saying we could do a broad alliance with communists or socialists as long as they gave us immigration. Then 2 months later, he said we have to completely abandon immigration. Immigration doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is opposition to Palantir and the Silicon Valley people who want to control America. We have to let immigration go. It's a lost cause. Then 2 months after that, the only thing that matters is Zionism. That's the only thing that matters. So, in typical Nick form, he's not very consistent. And if I could nail him down, probably he would say something like, anti-Zionism is the number one thing. I would say it's obviously immigration. It's obviously ending mass migration. But this whole conversation belies sort of a fundamental misunderstanding about the question of power to begin with. There's a big difference between what do you want to achieve versus who you can trust. And this is what caused I think the last few months to be very, very disappointing for the right wing is we act like when we have debates online, like we're sitting at the control panel of the entire universe, and we need to press a button on that control panel that will fix things. We only get like a certain number of button presses. So our number one issue for our coalition has to be the first button that we would push. I mean, but we don't ask ourselves how possible this is, how important it is ultimately in the grand scheme of things, or if the pushing of that button this one time means that you're necessarily going to be my friend in the world that happens after we push that button. These are all different things. So look, if there was one button I could push, and I could only push one, it would make me ultimate, unquestioned, absolute monarch of the entire earth. After I got that, I could handle all the other problems in the world. I assure you, right? Just give me all the power. That would be my number one issue, right? That's the most important issue is taking 100% of the power. Great, you got it. That's your coalition now. The coalition to take all of the power. Any other coalition is kind of, it's kind of stupid. Like you have to ask yourself, we're going to make a new right-wing coalition. Well, what is that coalition going to be about? Well, what is the left coalition? The left has a very sustainable coalition because the coalition of the left is just, let's fuck over, pardon my French, let's fuck over all of the people who are white, straight, male, Christian, heritage Americans of one variety or the other, the people who are like the founding fathers. Let's take all their wealth away and distribute it to people who were historically considered marginalized. And because a lot of people were considered marginalized, you have this huge intersectional coalition. But, the coalition will hold for as long as there's money to take away from white, straight men. Once it seems that there isn't so much money that you can take from white straight men, and maybe the people who are really rich are rich Chinese men in China, the coalition will immediately fall apart because there'll be no one left to rob. But in the foreseeable future, they'll probably be able to hold up the intersectional coalition against straight white men for probably another 10 or 20 years before it starts falling apart. The right wing does not have a coalitional political formula that looks like that. So the two types of coalitional formula that it proposes in lieu of just being, I want revenge and I want Gibbs from the powers that be, the two kinds of things that it tries to organize itself around are the specific issues that control the power in America, AKA who controls foreign policy, who controls immigration, who controls education, and who controls technology. So like universities, Palantir, Zionism, and mass migration, respectively. I might have gotten that out of order, but bear with me. So we either organize our coalition around prioritizing which knob of power to seize, or alternatively, we organize our coalition around moral worth, around how much I trust you in the long term as a friend. Now, this is going to be hard, guys, because the left does not understand this distinction. For the left, power and morality are one and the same. You are a moral person insofar as you want more power delegated to the left. And you want power delegated to the left insomuch as you are a moral person. This is why all of the leftists consider the only real crime to be a right-winger. They say that the only crime is racism or sexism, but racism or sexism are just stand-ins for being right-wing, wanting to have power taken away from the progressive coalition and given to somebody else, or have it stay put where it was historically. Those are the two ways that you can be a bad person. So you'll have people say, they'll say something like, Charlie Kirk was a terrible person. That guy, Michael Burns from, what was his channel, Extra Credits? I forget. He was one of these corporate YouTubers. He was going on about Charlie Kirk wasn't a good person. Dying doesn't make you a good person. Dying doesn't make you a good person. Yeah, but what does make you a good person, Michael Burns? He was a good family man. Most people who are around him thought that he was a really generous man. He talked to people charitably. He scared a few hoes here and there. He said some mean words, which certainly got a lot of women upset. But by most accounts, Charlie Kirk was a very good guy. But he committed the arch sin of being a right winger. Because he was a right winger, not even a noble death could have redeemed him from that moral infraction. For the left, being a good person and being against the right are one and the same thing. But that's not the same thing for us. When we talk about, say, for instance, dismantling the Zionist relationship inside the State Department, that tells me nothing about whether you're a good person or not, nor does it tell me whether, I want people who will fight for my children's future, who will fight for my faith and my values. There are a lot of people who hate Zionism, that hate all of those things. And so the second that knob gets turned or flips or starts becoming not so much of an issue, all those people will turn on me in a second. And the same thing is true for any number of things. Fighting Silicon Valley, controlling mass migration. Now, those will all give more power to people who are broadly like me and who broadly share my values. But knowing that you prioritize this knob of power over that does not ultimately give me an insight into how trustworthy you are as a person. For my money, the big problem with the right wing is that it cannot organize. Trump made a big mistake and it fractured his popular coalition. That's something that he's going to have to pay for in 2028 and 2030, and we'll all have to pay for once Democrats come back into power. But Trump did not force the right wing to act like a bunch of spoiled children, denouncing each other for months and months and months, and acting like optics crybabies because we couldn't get our shit together and talk to each other like adults. Ultimately, certain levers of power need to be wrestled from the grips of the cathedral and given to people who are responsible. That is the ultimate goal. But in the meantime, the right wing needs to act like a group of people that it can actually wield power. And the first step of that is organization. And the first most important dimension of organization is who can you trust? There are a lot of people out there who I think are really great take merchants, and I don't trust them. Or they're just not trustworthy. They're too emotionally unstable. They'll invent stories about you with no basis to them, just because they are freaking out because of something that Trump did. Sure, you're a great analyst of power relationships and of political science. It doesn't tell me whether I can trust you. It does not tell me whether you have a similar moral vision. Standing on a common moral vision of the future and a common moral commitment to the next generation, I think that is really the place that the right wing needs to go. That's something that, that's something I value a lot. Whenever I get the sense that I can really trust a person, and I've told the story before, when I first started doing this 10 years ago, in 2016, the entire internet was just chock-a-block full of these anti-SJW YouTubers. There were thousands, if not millions of them doing this. But something always struck me as a little bit different about Carl Benjamin. And it's because of the sense that he was a trustworthy person. And that is, and when we're talking online, when we're talking about building coalitions, we're looking for people that can kind of stand up and account for themselves. And that doesn't mean that, look, at least until 3 years ago, Carl had any number of just terrible takes, and he still occasionally does, right? He still occasionally does. But he certainly did back in the 2017, 2018 era. But it didn't matter that he had terrible takes because eventually he came around honestly. And so when you look at people, you have to say like, okay, but okay, I'll give you a contrast here. You had on the one hand, you had Carl Benjamin. Let's say you're in 2000. So let's just everyone here imagine you're in a time machine. This is the Magic School Bus. That's one of my kids' favorite shows. They go back in time in the Magic School Bus, don't they? I don't know. There's probably another one where they do, but at least they go to space. I think they go back in time. So all of you Zoomers out there, all of you people who are probably more sympathetic to Bazillion Thought and all of this stuff, like the America First Nationalists, the Nick Fuentes guys, let's hop in my Magic School Bus time machine, and I'm going to take you back to the magical year of 2017. Wow. And in 2017, you encounter two of the biggest anti-SJW YouTubers that you'll ever see. You'll have on the one hand, Sargon of Akkad, aka Carl Benjamin. And on the other side, you have super queen of the based Lauren Southern. Oh my God. Well, how do we evaluate how much I want to be allied with either Carl Benjamin or Lauren Southern? Like, who would you want as your friend in 2017? Well, let's use like the based Nick Fuentes discernment mechanism. We'll just take like the biggest issues, like the most based measurements, and we'll see who's saying the most based and edgy things. And then the people who are saying the most based and edgy thing, well, they're obviously the closest to the truth, so I want to be their friends. So based on 2017 information, Lauren Southern, she's a hardcore nationalist. She's shooting flares at refugee boats when they try to get into Europe. She's joining Europa identity movements. She's going and making documentaries in South Africa. All of the issues. I think she might even be calling out the JQ. I don't remember, but I wouldn't be surprised if she did. You know, I can't quite remember if that was her thing or not, but if she didn't, she had people in her orbit that were. And she was all kissy face with all of them. She was the most base person out there. And then on the other side, you have Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad. And at that point, in 2017, Carl is trying to make liberalism work. He's trying to do what like Konstantin Kisin is now. And so based on the Nick Fuentes method of discernment, you would say that you would rather be friends with Lauren Southern and not friends with Carl Benjamin. Well, I've got bad news for you, friends, because let's wind the clock forward from 2017 to 2019 to 2022 to 2026. All of the people who were friends with Lauren Southern got thrown right under the bus. She betrayed them all. She denounced all of their ideas. She denounced the hardcore racial nationalist views when she married an Asian guy from Australia and became a traditional Christian girl. And then she threw the traditional Christians under the bus 2 years later when she met up with Destiny and decided to become a moderate, and even wrote an article, ghostwritten by Mary Harrington, no less, telling the world that traditional marriage does not work. It's just an internet fad, bro. And now it looks like she's going full Richard Hanania. She wants to denounce even the Christian nationalists, even the people who are, the ordinary Christian pastors like Joel Webbin, who post weird stuff, who post edgy posts on the internet, which again, I'm not a fan of. But I guarantee it. If you are Lauren Southern's friend in 2017, 2019, 2021, 2024, you are a year away from her throwing you under the bus and walking right over your corpse. The same thing is not true for Carl. Carl organically develops his opinion. Sure, he's a little slow. He's the tortoise, not the hare. But it's very easy to understand the difference between somebody who is, and look, we're all anchored in modernity. we all kind of have our preconceptions, and it's difficult to leave them behind. But there's a difference between someone who's trying to reconcile the facts they're seeing on the ground with how they've been raised, and the people who are just rebranding and rebranding and rebranding because that's part of their grift. If you're friends with Sargon of Akkad in 2017, you're still friends with him in 2026. And very likely you have in some sense succeeded. People succeed with Sargon of Akkad. People only get discarded and trampled over by Lauren Southern. The networks, the real networks that will redefine the new era are going to be ones that are built on trust. They're going to be based on people that can actually talk together. That can actually entertain hypotheticals, that can talk about complicated issues. And in the conversation over who you can trust, morality is a very, very important thing to establish as at the ground level. It's not so dismissible. And ultimately it is the bonds of trust that are going to create the organizations that really last, not their object level policy outcomes. A number of these guys in the whole circle around Bazillion thought are constantly talking about developing their own fraternal organizations. I mean, maybe, and Godspeed. I hope they have the best of luck doing that. I'm doing the same thing myself. But I mean, you better have a moral basis, a basis of identity that goes beyond just hating Zionism. You're not going to make a fraternal organization based around hating Benjamin Netanyahu. That will not last. You're also not going to have a base fraternal organization around, I hate to say it, proving how edgy you are. And I'm not trying to re-up the Richard Hanania meme about the base ritual, but that's not going to be a direction that you can travel in. Trust is more basic. It's also not going to be who looks cool. I mean, who looks cool? I've been through this with my friend Walt Bismarck. We have very different moral systems. I kind of like him because I like artists. I like people who are like that. And I think I'm kind of more tolerant of his antics than a lot of other people. But, I consider him, a friend of me, whatever. He thinks like all theater kids do, that coolness is something that you can actually catch in a bottle. He looks back to the 2016, 2017 alt-right, and he goes, we really were cool back then. We really had a lot of youth energy back then. Why couldn't we have that again? And what he does is he seizes on certain particular elements about what they had. And then he tries to hold on to it. He tries to hold on to it hard, as if you brought back like Pepe the Frog memes or edgy kind of racist stuff from 4chan, that this would give right-wingers in 2026 the same energy that they had in 2016. And that just won't happen. You can't rely on coolness, and you can't reverse engineer coolness either. That is impossible. Coolness is a product of a certain zeitgeist that goes in and out of the ages. And if you want to have an organization that lasts through that, then you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that you're going to be arguing from a position of not being the cool one in the conversation. And it's a bitter pill to swallow. But it's a place where people need to start. And it's sort of funny. Speaking of another person from the past, 2016 past, there just seems to be this incredible lack of understanding coming from the people who are, to move on to my next slide here. I'm looking at people like Richard Spencer and Richard Hanania and Lauren Southern. And Richard Spencer, I mean, what the hell is wrong with that guy? You just want to say, like, what the hell is wrong with that guy? He was on Today, or maybe it was a few days ago. I don't know. There were clips of him going around today of him going through the Bible like a new atheist and then taking quotes out of context and saying, oh, look, I found a quote from this gospel passage out of context. That means that Christians can't be nationalists. And he's going through with some other spurgy atheist guy. What do you think you're accomplishing by this? It's certainly not a serious reading of the Bible. I mean, anyone can do this. Anyone can just go through the Bible with a fine-tuned comb, take little excerpts out, and then blast them into the ether and say that the Bible supports me. Everybody can do this. The problem is that's not how religiously any serious person, whether Christian or Muslim or Jewish, has ever done this. I say Christian, Muslim, or I know we're using different documents. But always the approach to religious documents is that you have to take the entire body of work in a whole and you have to come up with an encompassing exegesis. You can't do what the new atheists do and just try to like word search your way out a particular passage to get you to win in one moment. Okay, great. So like now you've successfully owned the Christians in this moment. Congratulations, Richard Spencer. You've seized the headlines again. For what purpose? I have no idea. Because you want to prove Christianity isn't based. I mean, you voted for Kamala Harris, but Christianity isn't based. Congratulations, pagan bros. What do you think is going to happen when you subvert your countrymen's religion without giving them an alternative? And look, I have thought about this. I have thought, like, what if I discover through some extraordinary revelation that indeed Thor and Odin are real and Jesus didn't actually raise from the dead? And, that is I guess, a possibility, right? I'm reading a book by Alan Schmidt called Rhinelanders that kind of has like weird visitations from like Germanic pagans, even though I think I'm positive Schmidt is a Christian, even a Catholic actually. But like Neil Gaiman's Sandman or American Gods, that whole thing. What if I discovered that? Well, if I discovered that and I cared about, like most right-wing pagans say they do, if I cared about the future of my people, the future of like the European peoples broadly, or the German peoples specifically, or the heritage Americans, or the heritage English, the English people in England, the French people in France, the Germanic people in Germany, I would do everything to install that new religion before I went and just demoralized them by like debunking Christianity, by taking out of context quotes and blasting it off like some self-satisfied fedora-wearing atheist from 2013. What the fuck are you doing? It's just unserious people. These unserious people. Richard Spencer is still acting like some 25-year-old. And the guy he's like in his 50s now. He's in his 50s. He looks like an older man. He looks middle-aged. And I know I'm one to talk. I've got a graying beard here. I'm an old head. But part of being an old head is not being as confused and as effeminate as these people are. And, look, for all of the things, for all the people who hate people like Joel Webben or Andrew Wilson, at least there is an outline of a way that you can kind of go in that direction. Joel and Andrew are believers. I have no reason to believe that they're not. I would have said the same thing about Sarah Stock. So, I want to kind of hedge my bets a little bit on that one. But I like to give people the benefit of a doubt. And if I don't see a pattern of lying the way I've continuously seen it from Lauren Southern, or I mean, not maybe explicitly lying, but dishonesty, at least, withholding of facts, then then I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. That's a productive direction. I guess I should maybe visit a little bit why I found this video so like demonic. This is the video Christ versus the Culture War by Lauren Southern. I don't think Lauren is demonic, but she certainly plays a good succubus on television. And it wasn't just the hypocrisy. It wasn't her long history of lying again. It was the fact that she's trying to indict Andrew Wilson. And she does the same thing that all the feminists do. First of all, the first tactic they do is they take all of the times Andrew Wilson has been like really mean to all the girls on, what was that podcast called? The Whatever podcast. They clip all of the instances where Andrew Wilson has kind of scared the crowd. And they put it up out of context. So it looks like he just comes on and peppers them with expletives. Usually they're being passive aggressive little shrikes. I like that word. We need to normalize calling people shrikes. Lauren Southern is the queen of the shrikes. And maybe Rad from Hitler has that crown. Queen of the Harpies. Yeah, the queen of the Harpies. And sure enough. But in the example that Lauren Southern really focuses in on is this Andrew Wilson clip when he's pushing back against this other woman who's trying to embarrass Andrew Wilson because his wife had babies from a previous marriage and fled that marriage out of abuse. And so the woman is literally trying to humiliate Andrew Wilson with this, with essentially what is a virtuous act. Andrew Wilson basically took a woman who was in a hard situation and, as they say in the old-fashioned sense, made an honest woman out of her. And the feminist interlocutors, the one that was Charlie, the one he was debating against, wanted to use this virtue as a weakness to hurt him in the eyes of his audience. And then rather than recognize the fact that Andrew Wilson was, for all his scaring and bad words and untoward behavior in the public square, he was at heart, he demonstrated compassion towards his wife and his family and the ability to do good and be not selfish. Instead of acknowledging that, Lauren Southern exploits that situation to say, well, Andrew Wilson isn't really a Christian. He isn't really a Christian because he sees helping out people, he sees being virtuous as a weakness. But that's the opposite of what's going on, Southern. That's the opposite of what's going on, isn't it, Laura? Everyone else sees it as weakness. The feminists, the e-girls see that as weakness. They want to exploit it. Andrew Wilson didn't bring that up. They did. And Andrew Wilson showed them the contempt that they deserved. And I don't really like his content otherwise. I hate people who try to use virtue to break people. And so Lauren Southern, she does the various thing that she criticizes. She goes to a virtue that makes Andrew Wilson look weak, and then she tries to exploit it as him being hypocritical for some reason. And then she also goes forward and says that justified aggression is necessarily evidence that he's not virtuous, that he doesn't have a real moral sense. But I don't see that at all. If nothing else, Jesus shows an incredible amount of verbal aggression among people he thinks are sinning, turning over tables, calling people out, saying that they're going to go to hell. That's something that certainly would scare the hoes of the first century. I'm just saying. And so it's just this insane effeminacy. But everyone just can't get beyond this. And Joe Webb, and the other thing that Southern tries to nail Joel on, he called Christians fake and gay. Well, yeah, it's an exaggeration. He meant that they were being effeminate hypocrites. But that's just what's on display with Lauren here. No matter what we do, we always end up back in this kind of longhouse situation. And this is kind of a function of social media. The function of social media is to take things from a real space to a pure discourse space. And there's no real way that you can handle that effectively. I'm kind of getting back on my way to bring this all together. I think insofar as conversations on the right go, we're just going to kind of see who is a good actor and who isn't. There are people who just can't hold it together. They're so up their own ass with labels that they will just rebrand every 6 months because they don't like the last word they use for themselves. There are going to be people who are constantly spinning out conspiracy theories about how, and I hate using conspiracy theories, just so stories, zero basis to any of this, about how people are connected to nefarious actors. If you work for somebody who's a Zionist, that means you're a Zionist, apparently. I guess now I'm a shitlib because my day job, is run by shitlibs. That's not the direction where any of this is going. People are going to kind of show what stage of development they're at, and we're going to kind of move from there. People are going to discover their natural limitations. I think that's just how it's going to pan out. I don't know if Andrew Wilson is the real deal. I don't know if Joel Webben is the real deal either. I certainly don't like the way they use swear words and exaggeration. I think that's kind of unbecoming. I think it will hurt them in the long term. I think what my wife complains about is justified in a sense, although she makes much too big a deal out of it. And maybe she's onto something. Maybe that's indicative of the fact that they're really faking the whole thing. But the real political development needs to come through showing that we're trustworthy, that we can have dialogues with each other, and then we kind of know who we are. We can't develop coalitions around opposition to different political forces. I can't do this whole thing. Like, oh, is Israel bombing Christians in Lebanon? Is that worse than Planned Parenthood killing children in the womb? Like, I don't know. What's the context for all of this? What's the context for all of this? I don't care really. I do care. Ultimately, God cares, which is worse. But it doesn't feel like it's my job to sit there with some yardstick for how bad people are and determine. And that's what Lauren Southern wants me to do. Lauren Southern wants me to judge her good because Joel Webben is mean, or to judge her to be responsible because Nick Fuentes has a Groiper army. That's just it's such a catty gay game. It's a very feminine game. And it's not something we should really be concerned with. What we should be concerned with is defining the people that we can trust. Who are the people that we're fighting for and defending? Who are the people who share our values? And then inside that category, who are the people who have the wherewithal and the sobriety to actually step out of these catty back and forths and actually move things forward? There's lots of things that need to be done. Like, we're in something, I think, of a renaissance of in real life organizing for the right wing. This has had a lot of fruits. This is one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on places like the Exit Group and OGC. Are these new perspectives, these new opportunities? I don't know, these new competencies, let's say, these new competencies that people have on the ground to accomplish things. And, it's always smaller than it needs to be. We always need to make it bigger, but people are thinking in the right directions. And furthermore, I think that there's this kind of understanding of what the boomers' real problem is, or what the problem with the old world really is. Um, One of my favorite recent memes is this one. Um, so this is obviously from a movie called, well, no, it's not obvious, but this picture is a Brendan Fraser in a fat suit. I think maybe he actually gained that much weight, but it's a movie called The Whale. And the meme goes something like this. People will do, these people, usually boomers, will do X to you. And then when you complain, they'll look at you like this. So one of my favorite ones is people will make it illegal to hire white men. And then when you can't get a job, they'll look at you like this. And I mean, the expression, I think this meme kind of didn't land as well as it could have because people don't know the context of the movie. So, the context of the movie is an English professor that essentially is killing himself by overeating. And he was married to a woman, had a child, was very happy. And then, like, he dumps his wife because he decides he's gay, and then his gay lover ditches him, and he just descends into drugs and alcohol and destroys his entire body to the point where during the COVID lockdowns, all he's doing is sitting on the couch, 600 pounds with a ventilator, and he just has his little Zoom classes, and that's all he can really do for himself. And the only people who are visiting him are like a caretaker and then also his daughter, who he's trying to repair his relationships with. And the thing is that he's trying to convince his daughter, he's obviously dying. He's trying to kill himself. He's trying to convince his daughter to reestablish a relationship with him. He obviously values a relationship with her, but the big elephant in the room, not to make a fat joke, the big elephant in the room is that he is in the literal process of destroying her life. He broke up her original family by breaking up with her mother. He disrupted her family life again. It's implied by doing all of this professionally irresponsible stuff. And now he's destroying her life a third time by literally killing himself in front of her. And then he looks at her like, gee, after fucking everything up and destroying all my relationships and sabotaging everything good in my life, won't you take pity on me? I'm just a little guy. I'm just asking a simple question. Like, you're the author of these problems. You brought us to the stage of ruination. Shouldn't you be telling me what to do? I mean, this is exactly how everyone feels. I mean, I don't think the boomers have done this yet, but everyone knows that this moment is coming, right? Like, this is how it's going to go with the boomers. And I don't mean just boomers. I mean everybody who is in kind of like the old 20th century way of viewing the world. They're going to hang on to power until the bitter end. They're going to lock you out of as many jobs as possible. They're going to declare your taboos. They're going to declare your worldview to be taboos. They're going to do everything to subvert you. They're going to open the borders. They're going to run the money printers. They're going to spend the inheritance on cruises. They're going to do all the irresponsible things they possibly could do based on 20th century lies that are obviously not true, demonstrably not true in the modern world. And then the second they lose power, the second things revert to your control, they're going to look at you like, oh, I guess I was wrong. But I'm so weak now. Please take pity on me. Make everything right. Make everything right in this moment. But just 5 seconds ago, and in some sense, still now, you are fueling the very forces that are preventing me from fixing everything. You know, in the whale, he's literally trying to eat himself to death while he's attempting to rekindle a relationship with his daughter. How can those two things happen at the same time? Does he want to have, I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but does he want to have a heart attack in front of his daughter and traumatize her? I've said this before, But the goal on the right wing is not to be the based guy who passes some kind of purity test. The purpose of the right wing is to be the anti-boomers, to be everything that the boomers are not, to see the struggles of the Zoomers and to constructively try to help them, to always reach out to people on the left who might be looking to take things in a different direction, and to be good leaders. I mean, I think that's what we need to think about more. Look, Andrew Wilson, I don't like his content. I'm not going to lie. I just don't like his content. I have similar feelings about Joel Webbon. I have heard clips from his podcast that I like. I don't like his cheap presentation. He intermixes his serious stuff with ad reads that make him kind of look like a modern version of a televangelist. I think that is to the extent that it's actually making him money. It's penny smart, pound foolish, as they say. There's a lot not to like about these people, but I don't want to be like the right winger in 2017 who looks at Sargon of Akkad and Lauren Southern and says, "Oh, Lauren Southern's obviously more trustworthy," when in fact the exact opposite was the case. What we want more than anything else are people who have the qualities of trustworthy leaders. They can entertain. I mean, I say this kind of weirdly enough, like a big thing for me is like being able to sit down with somebody. I was really willing to give Bazillion Thought a fair shake. I still am. When he was doing his whole spiel about influencer networks, even though I know two of his accusations couldn't possibly be the way he stipulated them in podcasts. Even before he stood me up, I was perfectly willing to go to have that conversation, and I still am. But I sense, and I think that this is, I don't think he wants to have a conversation. I don't think he wants to. I think he wants to repeat a certain script. He doesn't want to actually take a step outside of things and look at hypotheticals and hard things and have a difficult conversation. And look, I've been trapped in conversations that I really don't like. I mean, here's a good example, right? I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. No, I'm not. And people say, "Do you believe in evolution?" Well, yes, I do too. And I don't exactly know how to reconcile Genesis with biological evolution or with cosmological time. And there's a lot of crackpot theological theories about that. And we could, obviously history isn't a science, and we could go on about that. And every now and again, I get lured into conversations with atheists where I'm sitting there and they're asking me questions like, how could a snake talk when a snake's neck is not capable of making talking sounds physically? And it's just like the stupidest question ever. And, I do kind of want to frame away from that. But here's what I will say. As sort of uninteresting as I find that question, I am still kind of duty bound to explain why I don't think that it's a useful line of questioning, how I've worked through it. I can go through things confessionally and talk about things in the abstract, and I don't have to just kind of get on my spiel again. This week on Trent Horn's channel, he had this gay ex-trad gay who was talking about why Catholicism is wrong about the sexual revolution. And they talked for about an hour or an hour and a half. And every single question that was brought up, the gay ex-trad guy, he just deflected. He deflected, and then he went on his new atheist spiel. And again, like Hanania, like Lindsay, he contradicted himself again and again and again, but it didn't really matter because he was in a flow. And at the end of that conversation, I didn't know what he believed, but I knew that the story he told us about how he was just a steely-eyed realist who became an unbeliever because he could do nothing else based on the facts and logic that he looked into, I knew that was a lie. What I'm looking for in conversation are people that can do things like speak confessionally, admit a lack of knowledge, entertain hypotheticals. Now, I'm not saying that you have to concede frame like, those hapless pastors that got owned by the new atheists in 2011 or whatever. They would just concede frame to someone like Christopher Hitchens and get steamrolled in a second. I'm not saying you have to do that, but being able to enter into a conversation and just ruminate on facts is something that's invaluable to me. Having constancy in time, being able to assert your identity and be honest about the gaps in it. I mean, we're all kind of Amerimots to a certain extent. That's a gap in our identity that people from Europe just don't have. If you're like the Lotus Eaters or Morgoth, you can just stand up and say, I'm an Englishman. I'm an Englishman. You can just say that. We can't say anything that definitive. We can say we're Americans, but that word has been I don't know, it's been cheapened by subsequent redefinitions, and it doesn't mean what it used to mean. It never really meant a specific ethnicity, but now it doesn't even stand in for the kind of heritage American identity that it used to. But it means more for you to commit to identity than to have all the details hammered out. It means more for you to genuinely have a spiritual faith that you talk about rather than like deconstructing somebody else's. I'm so tired of people deconstructing somebody else's identity. That's one reason why, even though it's like, it's technically like edgier and probably more topical, the whole like discussions of the Talmud never interested me. I don't care what crazy things other people believe in. I care about what you believe in. If you're a pagan and you don't like Christianity, just confess what you really believe as your spiritual core. We'll go from there. Maybe we'll have some common ground. Or you could be like a 14-year-old and just start yanking Bible verses out of context, acting like you're the first person who ever noticed this. And isn't everybody in Western history just so dumb for not noticing? That's just not useful at this moment. I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens. And we had a lot of bases to cover. We had a lot of bases to cover this week. I think ultimately that what will define the good leaders is them just being able to take ownership over a community, to say that this project is mine. Once you have people who are doing things in the real world that you're associated with, then all of a sudden the fakeness of the internet kind of goes away. It kind of melts it a little bit. And that's one thing that I respect Joel Webbin and Andrew Wilson for, is that whatever else is wrong with them, with how they present themselves, they are associated with a community that actually exists in real life, an actual church, an actual faith, people who are actually meeting up. And I respect that, it's important. I think that will define what our leaders are and what our communities are. And look, Trump probably blew his chance. He blew his big chance in history by kicking off this war with Iran. And I think this will be remembered historically as kind of a great missed opportunity and a great subversion of American interests for foreign interests abroad. But we don't have to make the same mistake. Our historical mission is to create the bands of brotherhood that will last. Now, look, keep your eyes focused on the prize of what you want to get accomplished ultimately. And that could be opposition to malign technology. That could be opposition to foreign influence. That could be ending mass migration. That could be fixing the birth rates. That could be fixing the family formation and dating crisis. Those are all good objectives. But the thing that will define your community will be the bounds of trust to trustworthy people who also share your moral disposition. From that point, we can move forward and we can confront events as they take place. Well, with that, guys, thank you for joining the lecture portion of the podcast, and I will go on to the super chats with Entropy. So guys, let's see. I should have checked this Entropy link. Okay, it is showing. Okay, guys. So for those not familiar, we use Entropy for the second half of the show. And I usually do these shows two times a month or once every other week. We might permanently move to Wednesday because Tuesdays are not reliable. I thought I had a commitment that was very reliably every other week, and it went to being just sporadic. So as opposed to constantly changing things around, it just made sense to move things probably to Wednesday from now on, and we'll try to go from there. Hopefully that talk was productive. I know these unfocused conversations about political events. I'll just say this: I really hate Lauren Southern. Can I say that? If it wasn't obvious, I really, really, really hate Lauren Southern. That she's so scummy and treacherous and just such a snake. And I can't prove that she lied. I can't prove that she lied, right? I know, but she did. At some point, like, she's contradicted herself so many times that the probability that all of the lies are in her past is like probability 0. And I'm sure that at least one of the scandals that people assert but can't prove is true about her. And the fact that she's trying to essentially use people's virtuous behavior, like Andrew Wilson marrying an abused woman, and she's trying to use that against him because he defends himself with expletives when other people try to conflate virtue with weakness. I feel that's so. I mean, like, look, good Lord. I mean, if ever there was a log in the eye, it was Lauren Southern. I just can't stand this woman. She has no place in any serious movement at this stage. It's just you're asking to be betrayed at this stage. Okay, let's go on to the super chats. Oh, that is really small. Oh, maybe make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, hopefully that's somewhat readable. Apologize if it's not. Okay, well, I'll just read it out. Maybe I'll resize the text window for future times. Ben White says, "Hey Dave, good to see you. Did you take down some videos or streams from Lent? It looks like your last one was months ago. I remember watching and seeing you more recently." Yes. So the Lenten reflections streams, I put them as unlisted. Now you can go to the Redwood Society blog on Substack, and you can get the podcasts that are embedded in Substack, and there also will be linked the full shows there. The whole idea of the Lenten Reflection series was to drive people to the Redwood Society Substack, because I want to cultivate that as a hub for people who are interested in non-political community building. I want to see if I can't separate out the discussion of current events and spicier stuff that I talk about here, where I swear and I accuse people like Lauren Southern of being hypocrites. I want to try to keep that separate from the discourse that's more about movies and films and building local fraternal societies and publications like Cord Crake magazine and the work of Johann Kurtz. I want to see if I can't keep those separate. And, of course, while you're here, subscribe to my Substack, Fiddler's Green, at substack.com. It's in the descriptions. But yeah, Ben White, you are correct. That is the deal. I privated, I made them unlisted. You can find the links on the Redwood Society Substack. Hunger for $25 USA. Evening, Dave. On the death of discourse, I've been incredibly disappointed in the discourse around TFR and the Western birth rates. My hot take is that the Hyundai Palisade will do more to increase the TFR than just throwing more maternity leave at women. We know the solution is to raise the value of young men, not women. Well, yeah, I mean, you are 100% right. This is the problem with the birth rates. So I'm going to complete a Substack article on this. Is that we know we can fix the total fertility rate. We can. First of all, let's back up a second here. Hunger is a friend of mine. I'll just give a little bit of background here. Not on Hunger, but on the issue. So since 1800 or 1820, birth rates have been declining, basically since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, birth rates begin about 100 years before the introduction of widespread contraception and birth control. Birth rates first slammed down due to lower infant mortality rates. So lower mortality salience takes our culture from about 7 children per woman to about 3 or 4 in the 20th century. Then comes in easy birth control in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and you get sort of the second decline in birth rates. And this is obviously due to couples just deciding to have fewer children. But that is not what is causing the decline in birth rates. Now, the decline in birth rates is that women don't find men to be good marriage prospects. And it's so obviously it's so obvious that that's the problem going on. It's so obvious that the problem is that women consider men to be not such good marriage prospects because men have less power, prestige, and wealth than women do. And because of this dynamic, the only way to fix the TFR problem continuing to decline is to, in some sense, either move the wealth back to men in terms of power, prestige, clout, and money, or to decrease women's optionality. And so the issue is that almost all moderates and progressives and feminists find those two answers unacceptable. You cannot decrease women's wealth or optionality at all. Those are unacceptable. Nor can you expand the economy and have all the expansions of the economy go to men. So because of this position, they've essentially locked out all practical solutions to the problem. And we are where we are right now. But unless you fix the dynamic to get women to see men as more marriageable, then you're not really engaging with the problem. So, well said, Hunger. And and everything in Substack is like, I've talked to these people, these moderate feminists, like Cartoons Hater and a bunch of other Dr. Saxby and these other people that are moderate people who care about the birth rates. They all stumble on this one thing. How can we fix the birth rates without decreasing female optionality? Well, you can't. You can't. It's impossible. Female optionality has to decrease in some way for the birth rate to go up. And that's obviously totally anathema. So we keep on treading water and never advancing. You can't just throw money at women for childcare. They will never pull the trigger on that because they'll never see men as being valuable enough to pull the trigger on. Darth Kilhoun for $5 USA. Hey, Dave. You started during my 3-mile run. About to report to my patrol shift. We'll try to watch the rest when not on duty. Right now, there is a lot of disgruntlement against the POTUS by devout Catholics in the armed forces. FYASA. Take care, Dave. I don't know what FYSA for your satisfaction. It's not FYI. Okay, well, someone might help me on that acronym. But thank you, Darth Kilhoun. Good luck on, I guess, I can't remember what branch you're in, but that's interesting that devout Catholics don't like the fact that the American president is disagreeing with the Catholic Church. And it's so funny is we were in a different church in kind of a more liberal area this last Sunday, and the priest there spoke out against Trump and the Catholic Church. And I am, like, as you know, I'm totally against the Iran war and basically all of Netanyahu's wars. And I I was just livid though. I felt like felt so manipulated getting lectured by the priest on this issue. And I said, like, look, um if you want to just pray for peace, let's join with the Pope and do that. I want to support the Pope, and I'm actually on the Pope's side in this conflict about the Iran war. But I don't like getting a progressive lecture that feels like it comes from a TDS group chat in homily, especially since the homily was about Christ's resurrection to the travelers on the road and had nothing to do with the war in Iran. And I was just livid about that. So I don't know, maybe look, I think everyone's really upset about the Iran war right now. And obviously the Vatican's official position on immigration is just horrible. It's not well thought out. And it's obviously a product of not Catholic social teachings, because there's nothing in Catholic social teachings that say that you can't have a border. And there's nothing in Catholic social teachings that say you can't deport criminals. So in toto, it's perfectly in line with Catholic social teachings. But, really the Vatican stance on immigration is a function of the political preferences of the popes themselves and the elite classes that they hail from. That's really what's going on. But thank you, Darth Calhoun. Good luck on your patrol shift. Cool guy for $5 USA. Lauren Southern is following the tradition of evangelicals getting mad at mean words in edgy media while ignoring the whole zoo of problems, big and small. Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with women in politics, is they're so focused on mean words. They're so focused on mean words. And it's a little grating. I don't know what to do about this, to be quite honest. I think that we need to consolidate male leadership and then just kind of shield women from this. I think that if you're Andrew Wilson or Joel Webbin or any of these other evangelical leaders, and I've had disagreements with people, especially from Protestant denominations, I see them on Twitter constantly antagonizing people like Leela Rose and all these other female influencers, like, was it Beth Ann Stuckey or whatever. They all have their share of cringe takes. They all have really, really bad takes, and they all have the typical women response where they see mean words as being more of a problem than a political order that's rapidly declining. But I just don't think that the solution is to antagonize women. I think the solution is to move faster, just take the reins, and then just kind of exclude them from the conversation. That's the only solution, because all you're going to do is you're going to ramp them up faster. And what you want is to keep them disinterested in this conversation. Otherwise, you're going to spend all day talking about how Andrew Wilson said this mean word. And that was my dinner this evening. We were just, Andrew Wilson said this, Andrew Wilson said that. Well, yeah, I agree. Andrew Wilson is mean. I don't like Andrew Wilson's style. But that doesn't make him necessarily a bad Christian just because he's mean. Just because he's kind of like gauche. He's gauche. That's the case against Andrew Wilson. He's gauche, and women don't like it. It gives them the ick. And that's fine. That's fine for certain contexts. I don't think Andrew Wilson should talk that way in church. But if we're in an idea space, and the female opposed to Andrew Wilson is trying to use his past, his wife's past, as a cudgel against him to make it look like his virtue is his weakness, he has every right to tell her to soak her head in as colorful terms as anyone could muster. I don't care. I mean, there has to be a consequence for that bad behavior in an open political forum. Otherwise, you're just going to make Christianity equivalent to being weak. You're going to fulfill the prophecy that the neo-pagans incorrectly say about Christians. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It has everything to do with how women conceptualize and process conversations. Who said the mean word? Who is being mean? Oh, it's him? Well, then he must be a mean person, and that means he can't be Christian. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Spartan Geo62. Rather than denouncing the dissident right, I denounce the Zyocon right. Well, I mean, who does the Zyocon right? Yeah, like Joel Berry and Seth Dillon and Jeremy Boring or whatever, and James Lindsay. I mean, I denounce them. They're so boring. They're obviously. The problem is that they're so obviously kind of tools. That's all I can. That's the only word that I really have for them. They're tools. That's all I can say. But thank you very much, Spartan Geo62. Cool guy, the death of discourse, or really the death of political and cultural hobbyism. Also, the discourse about Jews has been 90% a waste of time as I can see it. Okay, Israel is bad. Now what? Nick Fuentes just pisses me off with his Spurg takes. Yeah, I agree. There's not really. This is a good question for the Nick people. Like, I'm not Zionist. I'm against the war. What else is there to talk about? I don't control the State Department. I don't have back channels to Jared Kushner. I can spurg out about the situation on Twitter, but I don't see how that adds any new insight or materially advances the conversation. I'm open to alliances with Jews. I'm open to alliances with Muslims. They're just another non-Christian monotheistic religion. As far as I can, I don't think it's particularly likely in either case for the foreseeable future, except on sort of existential issues like global pandemics or nuclear war or out of control AI technology or whatever. Like, that stuff can be alliance issues, but I don't see anything beyond that in the near future. But Nick Fuentes is he appeals to Spurgs, and he is kind of a Spurg himself. I have to admit, and we all have to admit, that he is a very talented and a very agile player of the game in a way that very, very few people are. And so, as like Carl Benjamin is kind of the exact opposite. You can never kill Carl Benjamin. He's kind of like immortal because he is very, very centered, and he has kind of an uncanny instinct for how people work. And he has sort of even though he's kind of spiritually wrong about atheism, he has kind of this the spiritual sincerity about him that allows him to kind of last. Nick Fuentes, on the other hand, has this preternatural generational agility of rhetoric in mind. So no matter how much he fucks up, he always is one step ahead of the cudgel being swung at his neck. And so you can't count out Nick, and I don't think that he's going to go away. We just have to figure out what the right relationship is with people like Nick Fuentes. Novum for $10 says, "Evening, Dave. Joined too late to get your opinion on age to ID verification getting pushed down to operating systems. If you have any, aged ID verification being pushed down to operating systems. I've been warning friends and family to only use the internet to get information and to give as little as possible. But even that advice will be made irrelevant soon. We are integrating this technology into operating systems. I mean, we're going to need to start switching to open source privacy operating systems in short order, because we can't trust the spyware that they're putting on things like Windows anymore. And I'm broadcasting from a Windows machine right now, but this is going to be really, really bad in short order. And I don't know why there isn't a broader movement to fight this. This is, technology-wise, this should be a major, major priority. I'm still not exactly so sure how to use generative AI. I'm experimenting with vibe coding and all this stuff because it's my job, but it's not something that I've really integrated into a workflow yet. And the main reason is that I can't control my privacy very easily interfacing with it. It's, it basically, this AI stuff is a glorified search engine and a glorified template creation service. I need something standard coded up. I just ask it for it, and it will spit out something that looks like it, and then you know modify a few things here and there, and you're good to go. And that's how I use it. And no, I don't know how. I don't know, but this agentic stuff, that seems to be like just a huge liability in its current form until better protocols come in to handle it. And even then, we will have to, separate ourselves from these operating systems that are building this kind of dangerous stuff into their core systems. But that's a point well taken. Thank you very much. Blue Muggins for $25 USA. Evening, Dave. To your streams about 90s rock. My memory of the Smashing Pumpkins is that older millennials were big fans of them, and younger millennials barely knew they existed. The generational transition from Billy Corgan lyrics to Weezer, which was both nerdier and more pop. Well, yeah, so alternative music had kind of like these two phases. One was a very, very self-serious phase in the early 90s that was like, Sonic Youth, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins. I could go on and on, all the shoegazer stuff. And then sometime around 1997, the bands got a lot sillier. Now, Weezer had been around forever. I think that it was one of the original, I think they had been around since the early 90s as well. But they started getting a lot more popular in the late 90s. And so did a lot of other bands that were kind of taking themselves a lot less seriously. This was the rise of pop punk and what would kind of become mainstream popular in the early 2000s before the indie scene. And, I think that did a lot kind of, Billy Corgan isn't wrong to say that rock fundamentally changed in 1998, where it suddenly became a niche genre, like more or less overnight. In 1998, it kind of became a niche genre, and there were still great bands. There was an amazing indie scene up until the mid 2010s in urban areas that produced great stuff, but it never felt like it was going to take over the world. In the late 90s, or the early to mid 90s, it felt that the music that was rock would define an entire generation and what they were all about. And I don't know. I really like Weezer, but I don't think anyone listens to Billie Holiday and says, "Man, that's what my generation is about." They just say, "That's just a fun song. That's a fun song that I like listening to." Incubus is another example of a band that is quite technically talented, like Weezer, but I never thought that Incubus or Weezer really had any like really overpowering vision. I mean, it's not uniform. Like Red Hot Chili Peppers was a band that, in many ways, had kind of like a silly disposition, and they were really old. People don't remember. The Red Hot Chili Peppers started in the mid '80s. They were well known in the late '80s when all the songs people know from their greatest hit albums all come from their sort of second fame that occurred when the guys were way older. And but from the beginning, Red Hot Chili Peppers, very talented musicians, very innovative stylistically, but their songs are all just about having fun. The one exception is their kind of a tribute to mid 90s or early 90s rock, which is One Hot Minute. One Hot Minute is the Red Hot Chili Peppers trying to make a deep album like you get from Smashing Pumpkins. And wouldn't you know it, One Hot Minute is my favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers album. In my opinion, One Hot Minute is their Pet Sounds. It's an otherwise talented but not serious band trying to be serious, and I would say succeeding in that. Although I am very much a minority. Most people do not like that album at all. So that's my take on it. But yeah, you are right to notice that transition. Arnold Loki for $25. Do you notice the framing of the SPLC investigation story is that they defrauded their donors by funding scary right-wing racists? I.e., the problem is still framed as giving money to right-wing groups, not Antifa, BLM, etc. Also, if SPL donors didn't know what they were also, as if SPLC donors did not know what they were funding. Yeah, I mean, this is very well. So I didn't mention this scandal, but basically it was revealed what we have always known, which is that these organizations like the ADL, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and all these other hate groups, they create the problems that they are trying to solve. They funnel money to right-wing groups. They coordinate so that the right-wing groups can seem relevant and the SPLC can justify its funding. Now, look, I mean, the mainstream media is going to spin this as if it is like some big betrayal, but nobody will ever be able to. I think that from this point forward, moderates and the rest of people who aren't progressive just have to dismiss these groups like ADL and SPLC and half a dozen other hate watch groups. We just have to dismiss them out of hand. Like, oh yeah, SPLC. You mean they're fighting Nazis when they're not funding them? They pay the Ku Klux Klan members to burn the cross, and then they pay the people to report on the cross being burnt. That's the entire history of the SPLC. I don't think these groups will ever be able to recover from just those quips. And really, that's the most effective thing you can do with this information is you just incorporate it into jokes you tell about those organizations every time they come up in a conversation. And like Catholic Church, people used to do that at the Catholic Church. Every time the Catholic Church was mentioned, you'd make a pedophile joke. I mean, for years and years and years and years, it was like that. And for a sex abuse scandal that was smaller than proportionally than what was going on in the public schools. And but that will destroy the reputation of these organizations. Will that deter the funding classes? I don't know. I think that once the boomers leave this scene, I will guess that a lot of these organizations, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, will have a sudden crisis in funding, and they will disband and have to reform as something else. But this is going to be a generational turn that will occur with a lot of other changes that will occur. Absolute Defender for $10 USA says, I'm no acolyte of Spengler, but the reason I find your criticism of him a little hollow is because Christians themselves hold the exact same position on the scriptures. I don't take his interpretation seriously, but I do find Christians holding his interpretation, thinking it's a grave problem. I am not so sure I follow Absolute Defender. Maybe you could put a follow-up chat in Entropy so I can read it again because I'm not currently looking at the Google YouTube chat. I'm no acolyte of Spencer, but Christians themselves hold the exact same position on the scriptures. What's that position? I don't take his interpretation seriously, but I do find Christians holding his interpretation, thinking it's a grave problem. But what is that interpretation on the scriptures? Is it just that Christian civilization goes through the same? You don't mean okay. Sorry, I somehow misread that as Spengler. Okay, I'm sorry. You mean the pagan criticism? Okay. You're no advocate of Richard Spencer. Okay, I misread that. For some reason, I read that as Spengler. I'm like the season of civilizations. It's late here, but let me reinterpret that. Okay, but when you say Christians themselves hold the exact same positions on scripture, you mean modern Christian pastors. That's where the problem lies. None of these people could go into a debate with a serious Christian and win. The idea that you can't defend your own country or your own family as a Christian has been debunked repeatedly. It never wins debates. The only people who can hold it are these heretical Christian pastors and then moderate Orthodox pastors that are trying to keep histrionic women in their congregation satisfied. Yes, you can excerpt those interpretations from scripture, but like, what are you expecting? Do you not think that I can take any scripture and excerpt from it something that sounds like it's what modern women would want to believe? Certainly, having any knowledge of modern pagan religions, I know that modern paganism is largely a feminist cult. The based pagans are outnumbered by the feminist progressive pagans, probably 4-1. So, like, any religion has this problem, Absolute Defender. But this perspective that Richard Spencer is highlighting, no serious Christian defends it when they're called to the floor as an actual biblical exegesis. They will always say the Christians have a right and a duty to defend their collectives against bad actors. So, like, what do you want? Like, if you're saying that we have to throw everything into the fire that can possibly be manipulated linguistically to say something that is destructive, then we'll throw all Western civilization on the fire. I don't think we want to do that. Or are we just going to start over from ground one? And if so, what is that going to be? What is our basic stance for morality, our basis for morality? What is our religious core? The fact that you've discovered a heresy that's, a long-standing heresy of Christian pacifism does not mean that it is a proper interpretation. And it's Spencer's inability to do holistic exegesis, which is his downfall, not his resurrection of that particular heresy. But thank you for the super chat, Absolute Defender. Mark Goats for $8. Thank you for bringing the stream back. I missed the live cast, but I'll catch up later. I'm trying to make sense of the end of Narnia, further up and further in, and has a kind of one-shotted me into a view of heaven. Well, I kind of like the C.S. Lewis's view of heaven. One of the reasons why I really hated Lauren Southern's video is that she used C.S. Lewis. And that kind of ruins it almost, because I know that she doesn't believe what she is saying. She's going to reinvent herself in 2 more years, and all the friends she has now are going to be thrown right under the bus one more time. Like clockwork. Lauren Southern always betrays her friends. Or, I don't know, maybe she'll stop at some point. At some point, she'll have to stop because people will just not trust her anymore. And then she'll have to make do with where she is. But really, I don't want to have Lauren Southern describe heaven or hell to me and Christian virtue. She has no right to do that. She has no basis on which to do that. Novum for $5 on Genesis. Do you really think you need to have a literalist perspective on it the way you described? I understand if you desire consistency, but I've never seen holding creationism and evolution both in one's mind as a hindrance to faith. Yes, and I think that is my mature position too, Novum, that I think these ideas can coexist. But look, if you do that and you get into conversation with some autist, they will grill you on all the details. And they will drag you into all sorts of thorny conversations that will make you look very, very weak and indecisive. And the optics of that are terrible. Now, look, I'll go through that with you if you like, but it's not my choice thing to discuss. But honesty, I think, compels me to entertain it if it were to come up in the abstract. Sam153 for $50. Hope your Easter was blessed. Cheers, Dave. Well, thank you very much. Ben White for $3. My older Gen X father put a lot of his hope in Trump's second term and was very excited when he got elected. Over the past 2 months, he's become more and more depressed. What can I do to help? Well, just assure him that there are groups of young men that are aware of this country's problems, and we're working tirelessly to make sure that there is a future for people that is not going to be weighed down by the myths, plural, of the 20th century. I mean, I don't know what else people can ask for other than that there are people who are dedicated to the continuation of the things that are good in this world and the faith towards things that are higher, that are divine. Mark Goetz for $3. Also, thank you for sharing my article on man keeping the other week. I had to stop following Jeremy Moeller because Marxist feminism is just insane, outdated, and enraging. Yeah, I think I read that article that I think I even commented on that Jeremy Moeller article. It was enraging. It just exactly the gender, like it's clueless gender slop that denies obvious things that we're seeing in this world. And it just looks like it's been designed. It's like one of those essays you would write to get the approval of women in college. Like it seems it begins with sort of the end in mind. It doesn't feel like it's a result of an organic reasoning process. So, it is what it is, I guess. The Shadow Band for $25. Glad I caught you live for once. You read either Perdidio Street Station or House of Leaves. I have not read either of them yet. I will try to get around to them. House of Leaves. I remember that one. Make sure it's on my list here. House of Leaves. Is that a fantasy? Postmodern horror. Well, okay, I will definitely take a look at it. Yes, this is on my list. Thank you, Shadow Band, and thank you for the very generous super chat. And we're on to the last one. Thank God, because my voice is getting quite tired. Let's cue up Psalm 54, KJV. I just picked a number from random, and we'll do the last. Oh, there's two more super chats. Okay, first one by Ben White, USA $3. How does female optionality differ from male optionality? Whether that be access to a wide variety of women, food products at the supermarket, or even the choice of different jobs in different cities. Well, I mean, male optionality is a problem at some level too. Really, your optionality when it comes to sexual dynamics should be fairly limited. The issue is that in a game where both sexes can have sex outside of marriage and can indefinitely inhabit the dating pool, then optionality in either sex is going to be a huge issue. But the problem here with female optionality is I can't communicate this to my wife. If I were to say men need to not have pornography at all, and men need to stop having side chicks, and they need to get married, everyone agrees with me on that. Progressives agree with me on that. I can walk into a room and say, men don't have side chicks. Let's get rid of pornography. Let's go back to a focus on marriage on the man side, and everyone will, like, unless you are a very radical leftist, like in the Bosch camp, everyone will stand up and applaud. But if I say something like women need to prioritize marriage over career, or women need to have fewer options on dating apps, or women need to have their expectations lowered and directed towards men who are closer to them on the ranking of percentiles. All of those things are just anathema to a huge number of people, even a huge number of conservatives. And they just will not be entertained. Any idea that women have to settle is, as Walt Bismarck puts it, it's epistemically foreclosed on. And that means that it's a very difficult thing to broach. And that's why, although all optionality in the dating market has to be decreased, it's always the question of female optionality on which the conversation inevitably crests. Even people who are progressive, like Darby Saxby, has no problem commending that we decrease the optionality of men. It's only the optionality of women that's considered sacred. Okay, cool guy for $5. I'm confused about your concern of Trump and the MAGA-tards. I thought the plan was for Trump and MAGA to simply act as a stopgap against the cathedral and maybe a bonus as an add-on. Dissidents would be building in the background in the meantime. Well, I mean, we are. We are. But the question is, well, I think people got kind of first of all, cool guy. I think everybody is building in the background while we get this respite from Democratic rule. I think that people were hoping that Trump would do more to dismantle elements of the cathedral and make it harder for them to get back on their feet when they retake power. Or he would do something to dismantle the power of the neocons, and he has not. And those two disappointments were very bitter pills to swallow. And I don't think that it's, even though I think everyone who was sober understood that there was no future but the one that we built, there was a hope, and not one that was completely unfounded based on Trump's initial sort of 50-day run with the Doge stuff, that his second term would be so disruptive that it might completely redesign the electoral landscape and unbalance the cathedral for a generation. But I think that the more realistic perspectives eventually prevailed. Arnold J. Loki for $10. The Sovereign Poverty Law Center. My underlying point was that while on the face of it, it seems like the Trump administration and the FBI were finally going after left-wing activist groups, they still frame it in shit-lib terms. SPLC, they frame it in terms of fraud. SPLC is kind of irrelevant anyway, a sacrificial lamb. Just red meat to distract from Iran. Screw up? Well, look, I mean, this is always a big problem. This has the real absence is the Charlie Kirk thing. I mean, just think of what the FBI did to the alt-right after Charlottesville. And think of how tangentially James Field was to any of the right-wing leaders, or how obviously accidental that death was when you look at the video footage. They were able to just completely throw everybody in jail who was even tangentially connected to that. The Trump administration did not do any of that. As far as I'm concerned, the only person who was arrested for the Charlie Kirk shooting was the person who was literally responsible for pulling the trigger. But I don't believe for a second that nobody heard about that assassination plot. I don't believe for a second that there wasn't a Discord where nobody said, wouldn't it be a great idea if Charlie Kirk died? If we were operating seriously, every single one of those people would be in police custody, facing some kind of charge. And maybe they would beat the rap, but if we were wielding power in the same way that the left does, that is exactly what they did in Charlottesville, and that's exactly what they did after the other scandals that the alt-right had. That's exactly what they did in COVID. And our inability to follow suit means that the Republican Party is not a very serious force. Okay, guys, I think that's the end of the super chat donations. I will go on and read Psalm 54. Save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them. Selah. Behold, God is mine helper. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies, cut them off in truth. I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. For he hath delivered me out of my trouble, and mine eyes have seen his desire upon my enemies. All right, guys, so thank you for joining me for Fiddler's Green episode number 72, State of Affairs. I will see you in 2 weeks, probably on Wednesday this time. Have a great